"Mummy, there's a boy in there. Let's buy him a bun." Ava froze when she saw an exact replica of her daughter. It was a beautiful May day. The scents of blooming lilacs and cherry blossoms were in the air. The mood was somehow pre-holiday, as it often happens in May. Ava was walking down a picturesque alley in the park, holding her 7-year-old daughter Anne tightly by the hand. A beautiful young woman in a light, elegant trouser suit, a pretty little girl. Her long brown hair falls freely on her shoulders in soft waves. Her light sundress emphasizes the natural swarthiness of her skin, and her face shines with huge eyes of an amazing turquoise shade. Anne resembles a beautiful doll. Ava often admires her daughter, and she's not the only one. Even now in the park, passers-by look at them. Anne has long been accustomed to these glances. Ava was even offered to make her daughter a model. They said that in this field the little girl is waiting for success, but the young mother refused. "Let the child have a childhood. We'll grow up, we'll decide what to do." Now the daughter is better to focus on games, knowledge of the world, study. Anne took the best from her parents, Ava and Andrew. People have often said that it would be good on one child of their couple not to stop, since such successful children turn out. Anne should have a brother. That's what those who didn't know Ava and Andrew's story said. And those who knew, they were much more tactful, of course, because they realized that the mention of a second child for Ava like a sharp knife. What she went through 7 years ago, not everyone can bear. But Ava had to. She had to pull herself together and get back to life. Anne pulled her through. The girl needed a healthy, sane mother. So Ava pulled through. Her daughter saved her, it turns out, and Andrew, of course. Now, looking at a happy young woman with a beautiful little daughter, no one would have thought that behind her shoulder she had a tragedy. Yeah, Ava didn't tell her new acquaintances the details. Why would she? Especially since it was still hard to remember the events of 7 years ago, but it was necessary to remember. "Mum, can I buy a doll with this money?" Anne wondered. "Could I buy a Lego set for the girls?" "We'll see," smiled at her enthusiastic daughter. Anne had recently had a birthday 7 years old. Friends and relatives had given her money, and now the two of them headed to the children's shop to choose gifts from the generous guests. How Anne was looking forward to this day, a day off, when her mum could take her to the supermarket. They also planned to go to an ice cream parlor. Her daughter's birthday, of course, was a huge celebration for Ava, but with a touch of sadness and longing. After all, this was the day everything happened, happiness and misfortune. Andrew, too, especially keenly experienced what had happened, precisely during the holiday of his beloved daughter. A memorable date, nothing to say. The couple had not talked about those events on Anne's birthday for several years, not like before. They both pretended to their daughter to be happy, showing only joyful emotions. Anne must have a holiday, and there was no need for her to know anything yet. Later, of course, they would tell her. But their girl would then be grown up, strong and clever. Not now. "Mum, can I go on that swing?" Anne pointed to the playground in the middle of the park. There were at least a few dozen kids frolicking there. Ava smiled again. She knew it, knew they'd have to stop. This was a place Anne could never pass by in peace. "Sure, go play. I'll wait for you here on the bench." Happy Anne dashed to the swings. It was just vacant. An amazing thing in such a crowded place. Ava watched her girl. Anne was like a light, graceful butterfly, so fragile, so beautiful, so delicate. It was as if she lacked earthiness, strength. She wished she had someone beside this child to watch over her, to protect her. Ava's heart snapped again. After all, that was how nature had originally intended it, a graceful, airy girl, and with her. No, it hurt too much to think about it. It's too hard to remember until now. Will this longing ever go away? Will Ava stop thinking about what it would have been like if? To distract herself from the sad thoughts, the woman pulled out her phone and looked into her friend's chat room. It was always fun here. Ava's friends shared news, sent funny pictures, and encouraged each other. Ava replied to a couple of messages and liked a picture of Tracy's new pet, a black raven chick. The friend assured that they were the smartest birds in the world. They could even be taught to talk, which in fact Tracy and her son were trying to do. Tracy was always original. That's why Ava loved her. "Mum." Ava was pulled out of her cozy world by her daughter's voice. "What's wrong?" The woman looked anxiously at her girl. Anne's recently carefree and cheerful eyes were somehow frightened, confused. All at once, it seemed. "Mum, there's a boy. He's all alone, though he's still small. And he's very hungry. He asked a grandfather for a bun, and he called him a name and chased him away. I feel sorry for him. Mum, let's buy him a bun, please." What a story. Come on, let's see your boy. Anne grabbed Mum's hand and pulled her towards the summer stage. He's hiding behind the stage. That nasty grandfather frightened him. Vera immediately thought of a gypsy or a little street child in dirty old clothes. Many such children, unfortunately, parents drink and they grow like weeds, starve, get into all sorts of stories. Here he is. Vera saw a thin child, unexpectedly well-dressed. He was about Anne's age. He was sitting in the grass with his hands on his knees, his back to Ava and Anne. He didn't seem to notice them. He was absorbed in his own thoughts. Strange. Ava was well-versed in children's fashion. This kid, who, according to her daughter, was starving and begging on the streets for bread, was wearing a branded t-shirt and expensive denim shorts. The kind of thing that's sold in shops that Ava only goes to during peak discount periods. "Hey." Anne rushed to the boy. "Don't be afraid, I brought my mum. She won't let that old grandfather in." The boy turned round and looked at Ava. The woman gasped. This child had huge eyes of a rare turquoise hue, the same as Anne's. It was Matthew. No, of course the boy couldn't be Matthew, but in a strange way he appeared to be. Matthew, after all, still appeared to Ava in her dreams. She knew his every feature, and now the same boy was standing right in front of her. Ava looked at the boy, not missing a single detail, and found in the child more and more resemblance to her own daughter. Anne, as if on purpose, stood close by. The children looked like the characters in a puzzle book from the series of Find Five Differences. There were few, very few differences. The boy and girl looked so much alike that it couldn't be a coincidence. "Are you hungry?" Ava finally managed to squeeze out a question. The boy nodded immediately. He too was looking at Ava with interest and surprise, as if trying to remember or understand something. "What's your name, boy?" "Arthur," answered the boy. Ava was ready to hear another name, Matthew, but the voice of this child sounded the same as the voice of that boy from her dreams, as the voice of her son. Ava was born and raised in a close-knit but not very wealthy family. Her mother worked as a nurse in a polyclinic, her father as a driver. They lived in a small 2-room flat in a 5-story building. They didn't starve, but they weren't lavish either. Ava was encouraged to look forward to a better future. "Here you'll study to be an economist, go to work in a bank and become a rich lady," dreamed her mother, looking at her girl. "It's high time someone from our family got a higher education and settled down in life somehow," echoed her father. "Who else but you? You have brains." Ava did have brains. Studying was easy for her. No, Ava had never been an excellent student or a gold medalist, but she was never a C student either. She got a certificate with A's and B's. She did well in her exams, and eventually she got where she wanted to go, to the finance and economics department of the local university. How happy her parents were. Ava, of course, too. However, she was never attracted to the economist's activity. She liked to communicate with small children. She would have been a teacher, but her mum talked her out of it. "You'll spend your life wiping other people's children's noses. It's a thankless job. You know what kids are like, and their parents are even worse. No, daughter, it's better to choose another profession." So Vera agreed, trusted the experience of her parents. During her second year of study at a student disco, Ava met her future husband Andrew. True, then she did not know, of course, that a handsome, smiling guy will be her life partner. Ava had already realized by that age that she had an attractive appearance, tall, slim, big-eyed. But there were more interesting girls in the group. Also chubby Linda, or the owner of a lush high-bust Charlotte. So Ava was genuinely surprised when a charming young man approached her. And not just like that, not empty-handed. He held out a scarlet rose to her. Where did he get it? No other way than to run to the flower stall across the street from the university. Wow, how he took care of it. That in itself was already a payoff. "Hello, girl." A little embarrassed, said the guy. My name is Andrew. I saw you, and in general you are so beautiful. Can I ask you to dance? Such simple and sincere words. Ava was a little embarrassed, lowered her eyes. The guy waited for an answer. It was obvious that he was very worried. And then Ava looked into his face and met his gaze, with eyes, big eyes of a rare turquoise shade, which stood out so beautifully on a slightly swarthy face. Those eyes, they looked at Ava with genuine admiration. The girl even got dizzy from it all. Ask me to dance, Andrew, you have my permission. Ava smiled and accepted the flower. The rose is incredibly beautiful. And so are you. The guy smiled much more boldly, and then he pulled Ava to him and twirled her in a dance, just as a slow song was playing. They left the university right after that dance. They walked around the night city, laughing, telling each other about themselves, getting acquainted in general. Andrew turned out to be from about the same family as Ava herself. In fact, his mom was a nurse too. His dad was a foreman in a factory. And Andrew's parents, just like Ava's mother and father, dreamed of higher education for their son. That's why I'm a future engineer. Andrew smiled. And do you think this is yours? Yes, it's definitely mine. I like learning, and I like practice even more. I've definitely chosen my profession. I don't think I have. Ava shook her head. She hadn't admitted that to anyone yet. I think I would love to be a childminder. I like children better than reports and figures. I can see that. You have kind eyes, Andrew said very seriously. And after these words, he pulled Ava to him and kissed her. Since then, they had not parted much. Ava felt that she had found her man a kindred, reliable, loving, and beloved man. They were easy and pleasant together. They understood each other from half a word, felt each other at a distance, even read each other's thoughts sometimes, so it seemed to Ava. Andrew introduced the virus to his parents. The girl's mother and father also met Andrew. The older generation approved of their heir's choices. Somehow everything was working out so well that one couldn't even believe it. Sometimes I could not believe it, and sometimes it seemed that it could not be otherwise. Anyway, in their third year, Andrew and Ava got married. The guy at that time was already working part-time at his father's factory, and sometimes he took night shifts. So there was money to rent a flat. We ate on scholarships. Andrew and Ava were not new to saving money and shrinking, so neither he nor she suffered much. It didn't stop them both from dreaming of a brighter future. Together, of course. What else could it be? One day they would finish university, get diplomas, get good jobs, build careers and become more wealthy, be able to afford a lot. Such were the plans of the newlyweds. With children, Ava and Andrew decided not to hurry. Both dreamed of a large family with at least 3 children. But this is not now. First, education, career. They need to get on their feet. They, adults, can eat pasta and sausages, and if there is not enough money, then kefir and baton will do. But a child needs a lot of things. Ava felt happy in their cozy nest with Andrew. Her beloved is near. He understands her like no one else, tries to fulfill her every wish. She also tries to make his life easier and more pleasant. Ahead of so many good things, interesting work, children, a long life together. The news of the pregnancy was a complete surprise for the newlyweds. They did not plan to become parents so early. Both of them were a little over 20, but it just happened. What are we going to do? Ava asked her husband, knowing perfectly well what he would say. She had no doubts about her life partner. What do you mean what? To give birth, to raise, to love. Andrew smiled and hugged his young wife tightly, and then said in the voice of Matroskina the famous phrase from the cartoon, "I was already happy, and now I will be twice as happy." Pregnancy was not easy. In the early stages, Ava was tormented by toxicosis. She could not eat anything. Everything immediately came out. Ava, already fragile, became very thin. Andrew was worried about his wife, cooked specially for his favorite delicious dishes, but Ava could not look at them. Andrew was knocked down trying to please his beloved. But there is no use. Ava melted literally in front of his eyes. The husband accompanied his wife to every appointment at the antenatal clinic. "Come on, do not need," discouraged Ava. "What I do not come myself. You'd better rest. You have a shift in the evening. Still have a report to prepare." Of course you can't get there on your own, you'll be blown away. Andrew joked. You're so thin, even a little drought will do. The doctors said it's not normal to have this much toxicity. Yes, pregnant women can vomit in the morning, but Ava, she couldn't eat anything but oranges and tangerines. The mum-to-be was admitted to hospital for a more thorough examination, and the cause of her ill health was found almost immediately. It turned out that Ava was pregnant with twins, a skinny young girl, and there are two at once. Consequently, the hormonal changes in the body and the load on it just colossal. Twins. Ava almost fell off the couch when the doctor told her the news. The first emotion was joy. The girl felt happy, as if she had won a prize in the lottery. She would have two children at once. What a miracle it is. Then came the fear of carrying twins. It must be hard. It's already so bad in the early stages. And then what about two babies at once? What if they cry with glee and Ava is alone with them at that moment? What do we do? And the money. They didn't want to have children so early because they don't have much money right now. And now they have two at once. So there will be more expenses. What do we do? But Andrew, who came to visit his wife and heard about the twins, just rejoiced, sincerely, without any fears or worries. We wanted a lot of children, and here we have two at once. We are good. Everything will work out. The future father even danced for joy right in the hospital lobby. People around him looked at him with a smile. Ava was infected by her husband's optimism. There was a clear understanding that together they could do it. Ava was prescribed vitamins and injected with hormones. Her condition improved. The mother-to-be was released home. Andrew now treated her like a crystal phase. Ava took full advantage of her position. She ordered her favorite meals, stopped bothering to clean. Well, when else would she get the chance to laze around? She wasn't scared anymore. Parents on both sides promised to help with the babies to let their mother and father finish their schooling. The grandparents had even planned holidays so that someone would be on hand at all times. The day when the sex of the babies was to be announced at the ultrasound was a celebration for the whole family. Both grandmothers-to-be Andrew and Ava came to the medical center in full force. The grandfathers were not allowed to leave work. However, only the young parents entered the office. The support group remained waiting outside the door. Ava and Andrew turned the tap so they could see their children. The mother and father-to-be gazed mesmerized at the tiny humans. They are beautiful, Ava said. Yes, agreed the woman doing the ultrasound nonchalantly. I can definitely see that. Really beautiful babies and healthy, surprisingly rare. Nowadays, such are found without any abnormalities, as in the textbook everything. Andrew and Ava looked at each other. Their babies were healthy, and that was the main thing, of course, but they wanted to know the sex. And who is it? Andrew asked the question that interested both of them. Boys or girls? You're lucky here. The doctor allowed herself a smile. You're having a royal twin. What do you mean? The parents-to-be were surprised. We're not exactly royalty. Andrew joked. Dancing mummy and daddy. You've got a boy and a girl, the complete package. Not everyone's so lucky. I have here, on the couch what dramas unfold when suddenly the wrong sex to my parents. You guys have something for everyone. Yay, Andrew exclaimed. His exclamation, of course, was heard by the grandmothers who were on duty outside the door. One of them, Ava's mum, cautiously peeked into the office. Everything is fine here. It's never better, replied the doctor. Rejoice, you have a grandson and a granddaughter. Names for children Andrew and Ava chose easily. They decided to name the girl Anne in honor of Ava's great-grandmother, and the boy Matthew as Andrew's favorite grandfather. Oh, what a joyful wait after the ultrasound. It was as if the parents were getting to know their children. Ava was now looking for things in blue and pink in the shops. In advance, she was slowly preparing a wardrobe for her babies. When someone asked who they were expecting, Ava proudly said that they were expecting a son and a daughter at once. People were surprised, congratulated, and smiled. The belly began to grow rapidly after that memorable ultrasound. Skinny Ava was a little heavy to carry such a heavy weight, but she did not complain after all. Twins, so it should be. Of course, two children weigh more than one. Andrew took an extra part-time job to save up for everything he needed for the children. So many things are needed, like clothes, cots, and prams for the twins. And these things don't come cheap. And then, as luck would have it, Ava was diagnosed with an alarming risk of premature birth. It happens a lot with twins. The doctor explained to the young parents. And here we have a mummy who is so thin and young. The main thing, at least to 35 weeks to carry, there are already almost ready children. Not terrible. Ava was even placed in a paid medical center for observation. No money was taken from the young family. They arranged for the young patient under a quota. The director of the antenatal clinic, where Ava was seen, did her best. She was very sympathetic to the young parents. Ava was observed in this medical center by an experienced Dr. Mrs. Caroline Smith, a woman of about 40 years old, well-groomed, calm, with very attentive eyes, in which Ava saw a secret sadness. The girl had always noticed such things ever since she was a child. Mrs. Slow was considered a good specialist. She prescribed the right therapy to Ava, immediately stopped pulling her stomach. The threat of early labor was taken under control. But still the mum-to-be was told to lie down more and not to lift anything heavy. Take care, lie down, thinking about your babies. Smiled at her young patient, Mrs. Slow. She smiled only with her lips, but her eyes remained sad. Ava quickly got used to it, to the underlying sadness in her doctor's eyes. At first it seemed to her that she was worried about her, that something was wrong with Vera or her children. It was very frightening. Andrew appeared at the center almost every day, sharing news with Ava, showing her pictures of their flat. Ava was put on life support until she went into labor, which meant that the young father had to prepare the house for 2 new residents, and Andrew was doing a great job. Ava looked at the pictures of the nursery. How cozy it was, how beautiful. 2 cots against the wall, populated with beautiful bed linen, a chest of drawers with a changing table, a basket for dirty laundry in the form of a toy rabbit, and a nightlight, a projector of the starry sky. Andrew had thought of every little detail. It was so touching, so nice. I want to go home. Ava almost cried, looking at this beauty on the screen of her husband's smartphone. You don't have to. Smiled at him. Let everything happen at the right time. The babies aren't ready yet. So tired of lying here, every day the same. And I miss you. I promise we'll have lots of fun soon. Andrew laughed. Get some rest. You're right, smiled Ava. Andrew always managed to lighten the mood. But no matter how hard the doctors, led by Mrs. Smith, tried, no matter how careful they were, Ava went into labor early, very early. When Ava's water broke, suddenly she was very frightened. Her eyes even went black. She knew exactly what it meant. Now the labor could not be stopped, and the babies were still immature. They were not ready. Ava ran to the nurse's station in tears. They knew the situation of a young girl with twins. They immediately understood everything. They called the doctors. Luckily, Mrs. Smith was on duty. Ava was taken on a gurney to the hall. What's going to happen now? Ava was crying. You're going into labor now. It's all right. They're quite viable now. Just pull yourself together. There were hours of fear and pain. Then only pain remained. Ava was bending in half. Dark dots flashed in her eyes. She felt dizzy. She wished it would all be over soon. For a moment, Ava didn't even care what happened to her children, just as long as the infernal pain was gone. She missed having Andrew around. Mrs. Smith came into the room from time to time, examined Ava, praised her, urged her to be patient. At the same time, she was delivering a few more babies. The midwives were busy too. They were running from one woman in labor to another. Ava was afraid no one would be there when the time came. Every time Mrs. Smith, after a quick look at Ava, said that it wasn't soon, the opening was small and she had to be patient. Ava could not imagine that she would have to suffer for several more hours. She could not bear it. Finally, the pain became so unbearable that Ava could not contain her scream. At this sound, a tired midwife looked into the room, examined Ava, nodded in satisfaction, laid the exhausted patient on the couch, and ran after the doctor. Well, Mrs. Smith smiled as she arrived. Are we in labor? Now we have to work a little harder. Listen to me carefully and do as I say. Ava obeyed, doing everything Mrs. Smith told her to do. The doctor's calmness and confidence was very reassuring. Ava trusted her doctor completely. Mrs. Smith was there for her. That meant everything would go well. Ava didn't notice the moment when 2 more doctors appeared in the room. As it turned out later, they were neonatologists. After all, there were 2 premature babies to be born. They would need help immediately. The first to be born was Matthew Tiny, bright red, and immediately heralded his arrival into the world with a loud cry. "Good lad," smiled the midwife. "Amazing," said one of the neonatologists, examining the baby. "It's been a long time since I've seen such a sturdy baby, especially premature, a real giant." "Don't get excited too soon," Mrs. Smith shook her head. "It's only a small term, so don't jinx it. And you, Ava, come on. You've got a daughter to give birth to." Ava heard the words about her firstborn child, how he was born big and strong. She heard his loud, demanding cry that he was all right, he was strong, and he would live. What happiness. Now a daughter. Anne was born after her older brother. She was much smaller than Matthew and not red, but purple. Ava waited for her son's cries to be joined by her daughter's cries, but Anne was silent. The neonatologists were working on her at a separate table. Mrs. Smith was attending to Ava. What was wrong with her? Why isn't she talking? The new mum tried to see the baby, but from her couch it was problematic. Is she alive? "We're taking the baby to the NICU." Sharply threw one of the neonatologists, wrapped the baby in a towel, and ran out the door. Ava had time to marvel at how tiny the bundle was in his hands. "I'm taking her brother to the ICU," the second doctor said. "He's still premature, so we'll have to keep an eye on him." "Mrs. Smith, what's wrong with the girl?" Ava continued to ask questions. She was close to panic. "It's not clear, not yet." Mrs. Smith replied dryly. She looked very tired and even sadder than usual. "The doctors will take care of the babies. They're very premature. Anything can happen. We'll do everything we can." "The boy is healthy. He's healthy and strong," Ava said. "The boy will live. I saw him, and everyone said he was strong. And the girl, my little girl, save her." "The doctors will do everything they can for both of them," Mrs. Smith repeated. And then she turned to the midwife. "I'll finish her off myself. I've got 2 more women in labor on the floor coming in." Ava didn't realize how she'd fallen asleep. She must have been tired. She was tormented by anxious thoughts, tears in her eyes. Her heart ached for her tiny daughter. Ava didn't worry about the boy. He had been born like a hero. And he was screaming loudly, which meant his lungs were fine. There's little Anne. Somehow, unnoticed by herself, Vera fell into darkness, for a while getting rid of her anxious thoughts. She woke up in the ward. She must have been brought here on a gurney. There was no stomach, which the young mum had already got used to. Ava immediately remembered everything that had happened to her the day before and pressed the call button for the doctor. Mrs. Smith did not appear at once. She had to wait a little while. She came into the room, sat down on the edge of Ava's bed, looked at her with a look that was so strange there was a lot in its sadness, sympathy, and guilt. Guilt too, it seemed. "What's wrong with my girl?" Ava asked immediately. She still didn't seem to have screamed. Did she survive? Elena Sergeyevna nodded. "The girl was born very weak. She is in intensive care, now on ventilator. The prognosis is good." Ava exhaled. Anne had made it, so everything was going to be all right. It'll take some time to heal, but it's manageable. "There's the trouble with your lard," said Mrs. Smith. "What's the matter with him?" It was all right. Ava hadn't expected to hear such a thing. He was all right at first. A premature baby is always a surprise. You don't know what to expect from them. The baby stopped breathing. He was transferred to the NICU. We tried to save the baby, but... Mrs. Carol A. Smith waved her hands and lowered her eyes. Ava was swallowed up by darkness. She learned later that she had fainted. The truth was so frightening that the new mummy preferred to pass out. "Oh, she's awake," rejoiced an elderly woman in a white coat who was busy in Ava's room. The girl recognized her. It was the same midwife who had attended the birth of her children. "I can't believe it," said the girl. "I understand, sweetheart." The midwife sat on the edge of her bed. "I was surprised myself. I've seen your boy good, strong, sonorous. They cling to life like that. Well, it happens to premature babies. I'm used to having 2 of them. How can that be?" "There will be 2. How old are you? Or even 3. Don't worry about the boy, but be happy that they got your daughter out." The girl was on the edge, but he made it. "Good for you. She's going to be all right now." "Can I see her?" "I'll see her later. You can't take her out of the cuvette yet. I'll see her when you're back to normal." "Can I see the boy?" "Oh, don't, girl. Why tear your heart out? You're still sick. You don't need to." Ava stayed in hospital for a few more weeks. Matthew was buried without her. The young mother honestly tried to follow the midwife's advice to be happy for her daughter, not to grieve for her son. But she couldn't help herself. It seemed as if someone had cut off a part of her heart, cut it off and taken it away. Ava didn't feel whole anymore. She was missing. Something was missing all the time. Anne was recovering quickly, gaining weight well. Soon mother and daughter were already transferred to the same ward. Caring for the baby, the closeness of the baby, all this, of course, calmed. Ava even began to smile. It's impossible not to smile when you are so attentive and trusting look at you, such turquoise like Anne's eyes. And Matthew was buried without Ava. She never got to see her boy because Mrs. Smith wouldn't let her leave the hospital. "You can't, you're so weak, you must be under medical supervision. What if you have a hemorrhage or something?" "I won't sign the authorization, don't even ask. Think of your daughter." Ava didn't want to imagine how her husband was coping with grief. He had single-handedly organized the funeral, removed an extra cot from the nursery, hastily sold the pram for the twins that he had recently struggled to get. Of course, it was hard for him, very hard. But he was bracing himself for his wife. And Matthew, he dreamt of Ava the first night after the tragedy. The woman recognized him immediately, even though she only had time to see her son in the hall. A beautiful baby with wonderful round cheeks and very intelligent eyes. Of course, bright turquoise, like his father's and sister's. Then there was the discharge celebration, no matter what. There were flowers and balloons and pictures. The smiles of relatives were present too. The relatives, obviously, were bracing themselves as best they could and trying not to show their true feelings. Ava tried not to think about the fact that there should have been 2 children, 2 flowers, not 1. It wasn't working out so well. Time passed and Anne grew up. Grandparents on both sides did help a lot with their granddaughter. The young parents went to school, got their degrees. Then they got jobs. Ava was hired as an accountant at a travel agency, Andrew as an engineer at the same factory where his father worked and where he worked part-time as a student. At first the salaries were not very high, but then things got better. Andrew was appointed head of the engineering department. Soon the family was able to buy their own flat, albeit with a mortgage, but still. It was a spacious 3-bedroom in the city center. "We'll have more children. We need a lot of space." Andrew was smiling, and Ava, she was silent. She was always quiet now. When Andrew talked about children, they no longer had the complete understanding they used to have. The couple experienced the tragedy in different ways. Andrew had come to terms with the passage of time, almost recovered from his grief. No, he did not forget about Matthew, no, but he dreamed of other children, new ones, looked to the future. Ava was afraid, very afraid of a repeat. Also, she dreamed about Matthew often, almost every night. What was most surprising was that he didn't stay a baby. He wasn't the baby Ava had glimpsed in those dreams the first, and only time she'd seen him know Matthew was growing up and changing with his little sister. When Anne was 3, he was a serious, inquisitive little boy, dark-eyed, with bright, big eyes and a cap of brown, slightly curly hair. When Anne turned 5, Matthew went from a toddler to a tall, thin boy, wiry and mischievous. Ava told Andrew about her dreams at first. And not only Andrew, but her parents, friends, colleagues. She shared her strange visions with many people. But people, they reacted the same way. "Don't tear your heart out. Let him go," her mother urged her. "Ava, come on, let's move on," Andrew pleaded. Listen, you can go crazy like this. Emma, her best friend, shook her head anxiously. And no one understood, no one could realize that these dreams did not make Ava worse. On the contrary, when Vera sees the boy, she feels warm at heart. From somewhere, Ava was sure that this child had some kind of life of his own, pleasant, apparently full, bright. These thoughts, they made her feel better. And now, behind this summer scene, in the tall grass, Ava saw the boy from her dreams alive. Anne held his hand, stroked his shoulder encouragingly, and he stood so thin, so elastic, like a taut string. It seemed as if one careless movement, and the boy would run away. Ava had no doubt that he could run fast. Anne looked so natural and organic next to him. She seemed to be the missing piece. A fragile, beautiful girl and a strong and also very handsome boy. A complete set, a royal twin. The little chap's name was Arthur, not Matthew. "So, Arthur, are you hungry?" Ava asked. "Yes, to be honest. Mum's going to get us some buns." Anne turned to him. And then her eyes lit up with a new idea. "Can you take us to a cafe, the two of us? I don't want presents. Let's take Arthur to a cafe with the money." "What? That's a great idea." Ava agreed. She thought that in a cafe, in a relaxed atmosphere, the child would relax, calm down, and tell more about himself. The woman didn't believe it was just a coincidence. Strangers couldn't be as similar to each other as Arthur and Anne. "Caroline, there's a shipment coming in from the warehouse. Stay on the receiving end." Caroline sighed, regretfully tossed her cigarette into the bin, and hurried into the sales room. She'd been working here as a shop assistant for almost a year now. The work is exhausting, thankless. Then the customer is rude, will be caught. Then in the cash register shortage will come out. And the pay is miserable. Caroline always dreamed of being a doctor, to save lives, to make people healthy. She went to her dream for a long time, first school with honors, then 7 long years in the medical school, and finally the diploma as a physical embodiment of hopes and plans. Caroline chose obstetrics and gynecology as her specialty. She interned at a maternity hospital, there and caught fire with this profession. It is a wonderful miracle to meet new lives. At the moment when you realize that everything has ended well, you just feel inexpressible feelings, as if it becomes brighter around, as if wings grow behind your back. It's always like that. The impressions don't fade. That's what's so amazing. Caroline loved that feeling, loved seeing the tears of joy in the eyes of new mothers, hearing the first triumphant cry of a new person who had come into the world. Of course, different things happen in the practice of obstetrician-gynecologist. There are difficult births and even tragedies. But even in this case, cannot do without a qualified doctor, especially in these cases. Caroline's been working day and night at the clinic. I can't count the number of births she's delivered. She didn't remember all her babies, of course, but she remembered a lot of them. Sometimes only intuition and her skillful hands saved newborns from serious birth traumas. Their mothers never realized afterwards that they risked getting an invalid child instead of a healthy one. Time flew by with inexorable speed. Caroline was already an adult, she was approaching 40, but she still hadn't found a family of her own. When? Studying, training courses, working from morning till night. But here came the time, and wanted Caroline and herself to feel the joy of motherhood. Only there was no candidate for fatherhood around. It was possible, of course, to twist office romance, but it is always fraught, especially if the child will appear from such a union. No, the job had to stay a job. Caroline simply went to a bar, met a handsome tall guy about 7 years younger than her, a perfect candidate for fatherhood. A hot and very passionate affair ensued. Caroline had no deep feelings for this young man. She only wanted a child. But the desired pregnancy did not come. Caroline realized that she needed to have a checkup. She'd never thought before that there might be something wrong with her. But the tests clearly showed there were problems, and serious ones. The diagnosis practically ruled out natural motherhood. Then Caroline decided to go for IVF with donor biomaterial. It was even better, her child will have only her. The father is unknown. No one would lay claim to the baby. It didn't work the first time. It took a few tries. It was during this race for the baby that Caroline realized she was interested in reproduction. So many women now have trouble conceiving. Caroline could be the one to fulfill their long-cherished dream. The pregnancy eventually did happen. Caroline was over the moon, and when she found out she was expecting a girl, she was even happier. It seemed to her that it was almost impossible to raise a boy alone. And a girl quite a different matter. Everything made sense, everything was familiar. Mia was born a little premature. Caroline didn't worry about that, she knew she'd nursed more than that. And this baby was so strong. While sitting on maternity leave, Caroline learned a new profession, took a course in practice in reproductive science. There was no such specialist in their clinic yet, so her bosses approved of her desire and supported her in every possible way. Caroline went to work when the baby was barely a year old. Early, of course, but in their medical environment, no one sat with children for long. And Caroline needed money. She was a single mother and could only rely on herself. And everything seemed to be going well exactly as Caroline had planned and intended. But when her adored daughter turned 2 years old, she had her first seizure. The girl screamed and wriggled in the arms of her terrified mother. Caroline, of course, immediately called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly, but to the woman the minutes of waiting seemed like an eternity. It was impossible to watch her own daughter in agony. Mia was taken to the hospital, examined from start to finish. The verdict was disappointing. A serious diagnosis, very sick kidneys. A congenital pathology which was not noticed on ultrasound, as it had developed over time. Mia now required serious treatment and very expensive, importantly for life. Caroline was desperate. The medication for Mia was both very, very expensive. Of course, you can apply to the foundation, but the therapy is lifelong. And the foundation would only pay for a fraction of the drugs. The lion's share of the cost would be on her shoulders anyway. And that's where Caroline's new profession came in handy. It turned out that reproductive medicine was a very lucrative business, and additional bonuses can be received if you act skillfully. For example, to scare the patient, dreaming for many years about a child's complications, and take money from her for the allegedly necessary treatment. Caroline took a risk, a big risk, because she could be exposed at any moment. But time and time again she'd done it for her daughter, for Mia. Now Caroline regretted that she had Mia from a donor. Had the father been known, he would have helped with money and perhaps would have given his kidney to the child. Caroline herself was no match for Mia. She'd already been tested, and more than once. And there was such a queue at the hospital that she didn't even want to think about it. At best, Mia would get her kidney by the time she reached adulthood, or even later. And she had to live to see that age. The matter was complicated by the fact that Mia had a rare blood type, a gift from an unknown father. Not many people were suitable for her at all. There was, of course, another option, an operation abroad. The donor would be found there quickly, and everything would be done in the best way, but for a lot of money. The amount Caroline was told was so much that she clutched her head. Even if she sold her flat, her car, and got into credit, it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't even be half the money. That's why Caroline, gritting her teeth, stepped on her own throat and extorted money from her patients. She had once dreamed of helping people, making them happy. For the sake of this, in fact, and went into medicine. By the way, Alina tried to do her job impeccably. She took on the most difficult cases and fulfilled the cherished wishes of infertile women, helping them to become mothers. Aliona reassured herself that she brought them happiness and did everything for the well-being of these families. And there is nothing wrong with the fact that the price for this turns out to be a little higher than expected. After all, it was all for Mia. And her clients weren't that poor. Those in need simply couldn't afford the services of their center. Mia was growing up. She was different from the other children. The disease was taking its toll. She was very thin, pale, tired quickly. She had almost no friends. Who would be interested in playing with a friend who could neither climb a tree nor run after her? When Mia turned 7, her condition deteriorated dramatically. Her diseased kidneys could not cope with their work, even with the support of serious medication, which Caroline regularly got for her daughter. The girl was admitted to the hospital, first to a regular ward, then it came to the intensive care unit. Alina was not herself. All thoughts only about her daughter. Her heart was not in place, but she had to do her work. She couldn't lose her income, because now Mia needed even more expensive medicines. Your daughter can only be saved by surgery. Mia's doctor said, it's either surgery or a miracle. You're my colleague, you know miracles happen. Caroline nodded. She had witnessed miracles more than once. A pregnancy in a seemingly hopeless case, or a baby who had been born breathless came to life under the hands of a neonatologist. But it was rare, and Caroline could not hope for a miracle when it was an only child. She had a chance to save Mia. She could get the money just at this most critical moment. Caroline was managing a very unusual patient. Olivia, tall, statuesque, flamboyant, always smartly dressed, always wearing makeup. This lady clearly loved the attention. She didn't look like a woman desperate to get pregnant naturally. Caroline had even been surprised when this person had first appeared in her office. Next, Olivia surprised her even more. She walked confidently over to Caroline's desk, sat down in the chair opposite her, put her foot on her leg and said, "I want a child with my husband, absolutely. My husband, he's already dead. I need his heir. A boy, of course, preferably. You can choose the sex, right? I'll pay, of course." Caroline thought that Olivia had loved her husband so much that she wanted to leave a child as a memento of him, to see in the baby the features of her favorite person. That's why she asked for a boy. Usually boys are more like their fathers. Caroline thought she was a bad judge of character. At first sight, Olivia seemed self-loving, unpleasant, even repulsive, but she was capable of such feelings. Only when the conversation resumed, it became clear that the matter is different. Olivia wants to give birth from her husband, not out of ardent feelings for the departed spouse. It turns out that the child is just a way to get the inheritance. All the property of Olivia's husband was written down on his mother, so the man seemed safer. Why? Olivia didn't look into it. Something to do with competitors, taxes, and the like. Her mother-in-law considered Olivia a complete stranger. She never liked her daughter-in-law at all. And then the woman lied to her mother-in-law that she was expecting a child from her son, the heir. The old woman immediately swam. Olivia smirked unpleasantly. She even called her daughter, happy that her son would leave someone on earth. And she said that as soon as her grandson was born, she'd sign everything over to me and the little one. But the problem is that I'm not pregnant. That's why I'm here. Why don't you just conceive naturally and then present the baby to your mother-in-law? What if it doesn't look like your husband? And who knows, she's clever. She'll do a DNA test, she'll do it. No, I want IVF. While my husband was ill, they took biomaterial from him before the treatment. So I've got everything. I really will have my husband's baby after he's dead. As creepy as that sounds. Yeah, it did sound creepy. Caroline thought about it. She didn't want to take the case, but Olivia, she offered her a handsome reward if everything worked out. And the money? Caroline really needed it for Mia. So she took it. Olivia didn't get pregnant until the third attempt. It was her last chance. Caroline was terrified that the embryo wouldn't survive and Olivia's money would be gone, and there were no more embryos. But the third attempt was successful. The pregnancy came. But Olivia didn't want to follow the doctor's recommendations. Caroline thought the woman hated the baby inside her. He restricted her in the things she enjoyed so much: expensive booze, traveling, parties. I feel like a bloated barrel. She complained to Caroline. I can't wait till he's born. I'm fed up. Caroline was silent. Olivia annoyed her, disliked her. With her constant whining and, of course, her attitude toward the baby she carried under her heart. Caroline hadn't noticed Olivia's love for the baby, her concern for him, all the things that expectant mothers usually felt for their children. No, Olivia only saw her son as a source of income. This little man was just a means to an end. And that was scary. But of course Caroline didn't show her feelings to the golden patient, smiling politely at Olivia, showing friendliness and interest. Too much was at stake. If Olivia delivered the baby, if she carried this pregnancy to term, Caroline would get money, a lot of money. Mia could have surgery. The foundation had raised part of the money for the girl's treatment. But it's not closed yet, and Olivia's fee, it'll cover the shortfall. Mia will be healthy. For the sake of this, Caroline is ready to endure everything, not like the whims of an unpleasant patient. Olivia's pregnancy wasn't going too well. Not surprising with that attitude. Caroline tried to put her patient in the right frame of mind, but the woman still had no warm feelings for the baby inside her. And children, even so small, they understand everything, feel everything. Caroline had seen it many times in her practice. Here, complete indifference to her son as a person, as a person, as a native child. Olivia had never loved her husband. Caroline realized this quickly. She had to communicate with Olivia a lot. The woman shared details of her life with the attending physician. The husband was disgusting to Jean. She was almost glad when he was gone. She dreamed of finally living a human life the way she wanted, on her late husband's money, of course. And here is such a surprise. All on his mother is written down, on the mother-in-law, who, of course, unlike her son, perfectly saw the attitude of daughter-in-law to her spouse and understood everything. And here the mother-in-law put forward a condition: there will be a grandson, there will be money, for the sake of the inheritance, and suffered Olivia. First toxicosis, then pulling pains in the abdomen, falling off her back. She didn't need the baby herself, but without it, she couldn't be rich. The last ultrasound was very unpleasant for Caroline. Everything pointed to a possible premature labor. Olivia lay on the couch and, as usual, complained about fate in general, and this traumatic situation for her in particular. The woman was very sorry for herself, making herself look like a heroine. Aliona listened half-heartedly. At first this whining was annoying, well, as usual, then it didn't bother her. Caroline realized that the situation was very unpleasant. The pregnancy was in jeopardy. Tell you what, Olivia, you're going to have to stay in the hospital for a while for observation. You're going to need to get some fluids, and you're not going to want to be moving around right now. You need to lie down. How? Olivia marveled. What hospital? I'm meeting some friends at a restaurant tonight. It's Zoe's birthday, and there's going to be some big-name artists performing. They didn't tell us which ones. It's a surprise. You're in danger of going into premature labor. And the baby, it's still immature. His lungs aren't formed, and he's a little behind his due date due to hypoxia. No, you can't leave here. Olivia complained for a long time about her fate and even scolded the child, who seemed to have deliberately set her up for such a mess. Caroline, she could barely contain herself. No, she couldn't mess things up with Olivia. She might not give her the reward she'd agreed to. They had an unofficial contract for keeping secrets and cheating with the pregnancy terms. Caroline was entitled to a substantial bonus. The woman was taking a risk, of course, but she knew what it was for. Spoil it all because of her emotions? No, no way. After all, she was a professional. Caroline's next shift was a few days after Olivia had been admitted to the hospital. The patient was frankly bored, complaining more and more about feeling unwell and not being in the mood. Caroline traditionally calmed the cranky madam and tried to cheer her up. All she had to do was remind Olivia more often of the true purpose of her torment. In fact, when you think about it, they both had the same goal: money. No matter how hard Caroline tried to prolong Olivia's pregnancy, it didn't work. She went into labor at a critically early stage. The experienced doctor was well aware that the baby, and even in such a state, most likely will not be saved. And it is impossible to stop labor activity after the withdrawal of water. Goodbye the dream of surgery for Mia. It was all for nothing. The hours of Olivia's exhortations, the malaise with documents, and the colossal work to save this precious pregnancy. Anger and despair. Those were exactly the feelings Caroline was experiencing as she walked up to Olivia in the hall. Seeing the cranky patient in her pitiful state, Caroline, for the first time in ages, felt pity for her. Pain, savage pain, now twisting the laboring woman in half. And yet, most likely, all this effort was in vain. Olivia's baby isn't likely to survive. It was better Olivia didn't know that yet. Caroline examined Olivia, calmly telling her what to do and how to behave. The woman, oddly enough, obeyed obediently. Caroline watched her plans and hopes crumble. Tears came to her eyes. How else to help her daughter? What to do? Where else would the money come from? Mia had another attack the other day, right in the intensive care unit, on heavy medication. The medication wasn't working anymore. The surgery is urgent. Caroline used to think she had to be patient for another month or so. Olivia's baby would be born, she'd get the money she needed, pay for the surgery. Now what do we wait for? A miracle, like Dr. Mia said. Are you crying? Olivia wondered. That question brought Caroline back to reality. Yes, she had tears in her eyes. What's wrong? Olivia continued to worry. Did something happen? Something to my baby or to me? Jean, as usual, was surprisingly selfish. It seemed to her that the whole world revolved around her. No, you imagined it. Caroline shook her head negatively. I didn't sleep well, just today. But don't worry, I'll do everything I can to make sure you and your baby are okay. Of course you will. It's in your best interest. Olivia grinned. It was a short interval between contractions when she felt no pain. A midwife flew into the room. Mrs. Smith, there's a girl in labor too, the one with the twins. Get Sally to work on her, you see, I'm in labor here. But yours won't be due for a while yet. Reasoned the midwife, it's already starting. Sally can't get out of it now either. Olivia, you're really still a little bit dilated. Caroline turned to her golden patient. I have to go away. As soon as I'm free, I'll come straight to you. In the second room, things were indeed nearing their final stages. A very young mum and twins all at once. So fragile, thin. And how did she carry her babies to term with such a slim build? I wouldn't think of giving birth at 40 weeks, as it should be, much less twins. Mrs. Smith was the first to deliver the boy. She had a specialist's eye. The experienced doctor immediately noticed that the boy was born healthy. Correct build, good skin color, sonorous voice, premature but strong and sturdy. Not only would he survive, he would be a very handsome and athletic boy, perhaps even a champion. Caroline couldn't help smiling as she looked at this quality baby. Suddenly a thought struck her. This baby is premature. And so was Olivia's son. Both boys. If something happened to Olivia's baby in labor, which was very, very likely, they could just switch babies. No one would notice. No one would even think anything was wrong. The midwives and neonatologists began to praise the baby at length. Caroline stopped them in case she had to carry out the plan she had just formed in her head. The doctor wouldn't let her show her son to his mother, the skinny girl who was now lying on the couch. Because that's what mothers are like. She might recognize him later, seeing him casually in Olivia's arms. No, she'd better not. She'll enjoy her son later. Mrs. Smith said sternly. She's got to work hard to have another child. A girl was born after the boy. She was much weaker, but had a good chance of life. Caroline realized it straight away. The girl was taken to intensive care, the boy to intensive care. The young woman in labor herself had conveniently fallen asleep. Stress, pain, shock, blood loss, all of it. She'll be fine too. After the second room was finished, Caroline hurried to Olivia's room. And just in time, she was in labor. Caroline prayed to herself that Olivia's son would be strong enough. Ultrasounds can be wrong, and often enough. Of course, Caroline didn't want to switch babies at all. Not only was it a serious crime, not only could she easily go to jail if it all came to light, but it was morally difficult. How do you live with the knowledge that you've done something like this? Olivia's baby was born very weak, blue skin tone, oedema. It's a good thing he put on weight. Caroline noted that Olivia's son weighed about the same as a twin boy. That's a very good match. It meant fewer questions and suspicions from the staff. Caroline could see that the child was unlikely to make it, too weak, as if he didn't want to stay in this world. No wonder. The poor baby understood everything from the beginning. He knew that his mother didn't need him on her own. No one else wanted him. Caroline carefully wrapped the baby in nappies. I'm taking him to the NICU, the neonatologist said and held out his hands to the baby. Caroline shook her head in denial. I'll take care of him myself. You two go to labor room 3. There's a woman about to give birth. The last ultrasound showed an abnormality in the fetus. You're needed there. What's wrong with him? An exhausted Olivia propped herself up on her elbow on the couch. Why isn't he screaming? Is he dead? He's alive, Caroline answered uncertainly, but he's very weak. Pull him out, Olivia shouted. Save this boy, or you'll never get your money and you'll never get me. I don't want it to be for nothing. Such agony. Caroline nodded. She realized only now that she'd made a mistake. Wrong to mistake the baby for a living one. It had already been born not alive, but Olivia couldn't know that. No way. From there, Caroline went on autopilot. All the staff were busy that day. Luckily, there were several births going on at once at the medical center. Caroline flew with Olivia's baby into the ICU, took the twin baby out of the cuvette, put Olivia's quiet and already cold boy in his place. Then, with a pounding heart, she rushed to the NICU. She placed a baby in an empty cuvette who in fact did not need such therapy. Ironically, the baby ended up next to his little sister. A girl and a boy, they looked so much alike. To the layman, all babies look alike. To Caroline, she saw the babies very differently. The woman remarked that these brother and sister would be beautiful and very, very similar to each other, like two drops of water. It could be a wonderful family. But it turns out that in the intensive care ward, the babies will be next to each other for the first and probably the last time, and then they will go to different families. Ava, a young woman in labor, quite expectedly became hysterical when she heard about what had happened to her son. She wailed, sobbed, screamed that she couldn't believe it. Caroline soothed her, the woman's heart bleeding as she watched this girl suffer. But the doctor reassured herself, Ava, she was still quite young. She would have a son and a daughter in time, a little later if she wanted to. And for her, this is her last chance to cure her daughter. Mia has no other options. The staff didn't notice the switch. They were surprised that a seemingly strong baby didn't survive. But that's not uncommon with premature babies. But they were happy for Olivia's baby, because everyone could see that the boy was practically dead. Look at that. He made it. He survived. This has also happened many times in the walls of the medical center. Olivia looked like a winner. We did it, she cheered. Mrs. Caroline, you'll get everything as soon as the mother-in-law signs over the inheritance to me and my son, as agreed. Caroline was smiling too. If Olivia and everyone else knew what it took for her to hold on, as if nothing had happened. Time passed. Ava and her daughter checked out. The young mother still hadn't recovered from her loss during her time in the hospital. Caroline was afraid to look into her pain-filled eyes. And her husband, a handsome young man too, looked dejected, though he tried to keep up his good behavior. It was Caroline, the doctor they trusted, who had brought grief to this family. Olivia, on the other hand, was being discharged with pomp. Her mother-in-law had arranged a solemn meeting for her grandson, balloons, flowers, and animators. Caroline was thanked with a decent sum in an envelope. It was generous thanks to the happy grandmother she could be understood. She thought her son was irretrievably gone. And suddenly there's a piece of him. True, no one knows. No one even guesses that this baby is a complete stranger to them. The sum that Caroline gave to Olivia's mother-in-law went to organize the transportation of the sick Mia to another country. The girl's condition was already critical. Olivia kept her promise. As soon as she received the inheritance, she transferred the agreed fee to Caroline. She immediately contacted the clinic, signed Mia up for surgery, and began to prepare for the journey. Mia was operated on. The operation was successful. The girl recovered quickly. The terrible attacks did not bother her anymore. Her pale skin turned pink, her cheeks blushed. Mia's strength and interest in life appeared. Soon she and her mother were walking along the hospital courtyard. They talked and even laughed. Caroline could not believe her happiness. Her girl is alive and well. Soon she would be no different from her peers. She would go to school, take up, as she had long dreamed, drawing, maybe even try herself in sports, or dancing, whatever she wants. Amidst this joy and great relief, Caroline almost stopped blaming herself for the switch. At times it seemed to her that she had even done a great favor to all involved in the story, that girl who'd given birth to twins. How could she have two? She's just a kid. And the finances of their Green family weren't doing so well, Caroline realized. When they get back on their feet, they'll go for a second one. And Olivia? She's happy too. She wanted an inheritance, and she got it. And a healthy, handsome son to boot. Her mother-in-law, she's like a reborn woman. She loves her grandson, and who cares if he's not her own? The main thing is that everyone's happy. The boy himself is also a winner. He got into a rich family. Olivia gives him so much toys, traveling, development like a cheese and butter. Would he have got that in his own family? Caroline doubted it. What could poor students give this kid? But there were times when the woman hated herself for what she had done. All these years she was tormented by guilt, and even the sight of her own, healthy daughter didn't always save the situation. Although Caroline was quite aware that she would have done the same thing if she had turned back the clock. And then, Almost 6 years after that incident, everything had come to light, accidentally. Olivia's mother-in-law decided to test the family with an innovative hematology test. This is when it was discovered that her own grandson, whom she had loved more than life all these years, had a blood type that he could not possibly have. This aroused suspicion, and the mother-in-law insisted on a DNA test. So, the case did not become a high-profile case only because Olivia's powerful mother-in-law did not want to make a fuss. But she did punish everyone involved. Caroline was fired from the medical center, stripped of her right to practice medicine. Well, the woman even found it fair. She herself had thought many times about whether she had the right to continue working in such a place after what she had done. Olivia was left with nothing either. No, her mother-in-law wouldn't take the house and car away from her. But Olivia lost her monthly remittances and some of her property. She was left, as she put it, with someone else's child, with no means of livelihood. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. Caroline and Mia were destitute. Olivia had a lot of things, but she was used to a life without limits, without prices. What, now she'd have to get a job or look for a new rich guy? On the other hand, who needs her now? The age is not young already, and the child in hand. And not even her own, as it turned out. Caroline didn't know how Olivia had solved her problems. Was she able to accept the fact that she was raising someone else's son? Did she find a new source of income? Caroline chose to shut herself out of the story. She took a job as a shop clerk, made new friends, almost stopped sleeping. The only light in the window for her was still her daughter Mia. Yeah, they're struggling financially. Caroline's in moral distress, too. But at least Mia was alive and well, with a future, and no more of these terrible attacks. Sometimes Caroline wanted to call Olivia to find out how she was doing, how her son was doing, but every time she stopped herself. Firstly, Olivia was understandably angry with her, and maybe she should have told her the truth, back in the delivery room. Though perhaps Olivia herself would have approved of Caroline's plan. It was even more likely that the woman wanted to get her hands on the inheritance by any means necessary. But knowing that this child is not the mother-in-law's own, would not have allowed such a situation with a hematological test. Secondly, Caroline was afraid to learn from Olivia the truth about the boy's fate. What if he wasn't doing well? To worry about that and feel bad about it? No. So Caroline's heart is too heavy. She has to take care of herself for her daughter, for Mia, everything for her. Ava, Anne, and Arthur were sitting in the cafe. The boys were talking, smiling at each other and chattering their feet in almost unison. Ava was more and more struck by their resemblance and the invisible connection that was clearly present between them. Finally, the woman decided it was time to ask the boy some questions to clear things up. Arthur, where are your parents? I only have my mum. The boy immediately turned gloomy. But she doesn't love me. Ava's heart squeezed with pity for the child. How much confidence and pain was there in his words? I don't know why she doesn't. I'm trying so hard and I swam the best for her. I got first place and I get straight A's from school. They praise me, but she doesn't care. And now she's decided to put me in an orphanage. What do you mean? Ava was surprised. Just like that. She thought I hadn't heard anything. But I heard her talking to them on the phone. They were supposed to come and get me. That's why I ran away. So you ran away from home? Yeah, so they wouldn't put me in an orphanage. I know it's bad there. Everyone fights the carer's hit. I've seen it in films and cartoons. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be beaten. Wait, Ava tried to calm the child down. Why did you think that you would be sent to an orphanage? You must have misunderstood. Mom never loved me. Arthur repeated stubbornly, staring at one point. I even think sometimes that I'm not her own. Why do you think that? She and I don't look anything alike, and I don't look like Dad. I've seen pictures of him. Well, they love their own children. I'm not. Ava wanted to hug that poor boy. There was so much pain in his voice, so much resentment, so much misunderstanding. And recently my grandmother has fallen out of love with me. I don't know why. She used to come to me all the time, give me presents, take me with her. We used to go out, travel, and then she just cut me off. It's weird. Anne came into the conversation. That's weird. Ava confirmed. Was this boy telling the truth, or was he lying to gain her trust? Ava knew that many children who occasionally run away from home have a rich imagination and gift of persuasion. Could Arthur be like that? He'd press for pity, get fed, and then fly away like a breeze. He's the only one they've ever seen. When he's hungry, he'll find another couple, a mom and a kid, and he'll noodle on their ears. Well, what about this incredible resemblance? What about the dreams? Or maybe Ava's wishful thinking? Still can't get over Matthew's death, so she sees her son in any boy who looks like him, presumably similar. Ava didn't get a good look at her firstborn then. We need more information. Arthur, what are you going to do next? Ava asked. You can't just wander around like this all the time. What about school? And then, you have to sleep somewhere, eat something. Maybe I should take you to your mom. I'll explain everything to her. She won't swear, I promise. Mom's probably worried by now. Not her. The boy tensed up. It seemed that just a little bit more, and he would run away. She'll put me in an orphanage. I've heard that she thought I was still young. I don't understand anything. Mom has arranged with a doctor she knows to have me diagnosed as abnormal, and then she'll send me to a special orphanage for such abnormal people. I don't want to go there. I'm scared. Tears came to the boy's eyes. It was obvious that he was very confused, frightened, and really did not know how to be in this situation. It's horrible. Ava involuntarily grabbed her heart. The little child's words made her chest grow cold. Isn't there any adult you can trust? There isn't. I used to think Grandma was such an adult, but she and Mom had a big fight, and now Grandma doesn't even want to see me. I don't know why. I'm not the one who fought with her. Maybe my mom told her I was crazy. She believed it. What about neighbors, acquaintances, teachers, coaches? You think they'd believe me? Arthur grinned bitterly in a very mature, bitter way. Ava realized that the boy was right. She had a hard time believing him because he did tell some unbelievable stories. If it weren't for the boy's resemblance to Anne, and most importantly, if it weren't for the dreams she had in which she saw her son, who looked exactly like Arthur, one and the same, Ava would have taken the child to the police long ago so that the law could find his mother. Listen, Anne and I are going to the toy shop. Come with us. We'll get you something if you want it. I don't want toys, but I'd love to go for a walk with you. Ava took Arthur in Anne's hands and walked with them through the park. At that moment, she felt completely happy and peaceful. The woman had forgotten that she could feel like this. Arthur, he was native and close, very understandable. Ava could read his thoughts, understand what he was feeling, just like with Anne. Amazing. Ava talked to the children and they laughed a lot, joked around. People looked at them with a smile. It must have been nice to see such a happy trio. Of course, Ava was thinking about what to do next. Something has to be decided. Arthur was in danger, but she still couldn't think of a way out, and so for now she just enjoyed the company of the two children. Ava decided that after the walk Arthur would go to their house. The children would go to watch cartoons with pizza and cocoa, and she would have a serious talk with her husband. Andrew would understand her, especially when he saw Arthur, when he saw how much he looked like Anne. Her husband had always understood her, especially before the tragic events. So it'll work out now. If this rich mom wants to get rid of her son so badly that she's willing to write a diagnosis, let her give him to them. Of course, Arthur can't be their Matthew. The son died just after the birth, as a baby. He's got a grave. Ava still couldn't visit the place. She'd go sometimes, but she'd feel empty and numb for a long time. So Arthur is just a boy, very much like Anne, a child with a complicated fate, and he needs loving parents, caring adults. And they need him. Andrew, after all, wanted a second child, and Ava is afraid to give birth again. And so Anne will have a twin brother, as nature intended. Arthur said that he also recently turned 7, and that he should go to school in the autumn. So they'll go together. They'll sit at the same desk. Relatives, friends might not understand. Well, why should he and Andrew care? They'll have a son. That thought filled her with energy and joy. Only, of course, Ava realized that it was unlikely that everything would be so easy for them. It was Arthur's mum. Maybe she wasn't going to give the boy to an orphanage for sick children. Maybe the kid just misunderstood. Yeah, even if all this is true, how do you go to the boy's mum and start a conversation? Hello. You hear son, unnecessary and unloved, diagnosed, and shove him into an orphanage. Alex. Yeah, the boy's mum won't even talk to her. I'm thirsty. Anne suddenly reminded herself. Mum, buy me a drink. And Arthur too. Yes, I'm thirsty too. The boy modestly confessed. Well, before the toy shop, we'll go to the grocery shop. Ava smiled at the children. She liked to feel that she was a mother of 2 children at once, a boy and twin girls. They went into the grocery store. Arthur chose a Coke and Anne a lemonade. There was no queue. The woman behind the cash register eyed the trio carefully. That was okay. Ava was used to it by now. A lot of people were looking at them. They must have looked great together. The female cashier reminded Ava a lot of someone. Well, she often did. There was no telling why nature had bestowed her with a good memory for faces. But who those faces were, under what circumstances they had met Ava, that was something that was quickly forgotten. Ava exhaled the seller when the woman handed her bottles of children. Is it true, you? Yes, she nodded. My name is Ava. Do I know you? Are these your children? The boy, you found him, didn't you? Oh my God, I'm so glad. You have no idea. Tears glistened in the shop assistant's eyes. Her lips were trembling. Ava didn't understand a thing. The children also looked at the cashier in bewilderment. Woman, you must have me confused with someone else. Ava shook her head. She wished they'd let them go shopping sooner. We have to get out of here. The saleswoman is strange, crazy maybe? She scared the kids. Are they both your kids? The cashier was still going on. Yes, Anne suddenly answered. We're twins. The girl said it with pride. Vera understood her daughter. She wanted people to think of them like that, a mum and her 2 children. Ava, we need to talk. Maybe the kids can play in the dry pool for a while? I don't mind, said the perky Anne. Arthur nodded demurely. The children, holding hands, ran off in the direction of the huge pool filled with brightly colored balls. The saleswoman came out from behind the cash register and approached Ava. Let's go over to where the bench is. It's comfortable to talk there. Okay, Ava agreed, uncomprehending. A cold, clammy fear rumbled in her stomach. For some reason, the woman cashier was unpleasant, although she had a very attractive appearance and spoke in a friendly manner. You didn't recognize me. The saleswoman stated the fact as they both settled down on a comfortable bench. I'm Mrs. Caroline Smith, the doctor who delivered your baby 7 years ago. Ava stretched out. Now she really remembered why the salesman's face looked so familiar. All these years I've been tormented by what I did. Mrs. Smith continued. I kept thinking of your eyes, black with grief, thinking of your baby. I'm glad you found each other. I just wish I knew how it happened. What do you mean? That boy? Isn't that your son? Actually, no, Ava confessed. We met him on the street. The kid was in a difficult situation. I'm at a loss, to be honest. It's Arthur, isn't it? Mrs. Smith said. I couldn't identify myself. I've been monitoring Olivia's social media all this time, making sure the boy was okay. Yeah, he said his name was Arthur. And his mom's name is Olivia. Ava confirmed it. So you know the boy, you know his parents? Mrs. Smith's knowledge was frightening. The speculation fluttered around in her head like flushed birds. Ava had sensed almost immediately that Arthur was not a stranger to her, but that was on the level of intuition. And now Mrs. Smith. Ava, I don't understand how Arthur ended up on the street. He's usually well looked after. And I'm even more surprised that you two somehow met, saw each other, ended up together. If you knew how surprised I am by all this, I don't understand it at all. I'll tell you everything. I need to put my mind at ease. And you need the truth. It's not easy, it's the truth. It will change your whole family's life, but you can't hide it any longer. Mrs. Smith told Ava everything. Her daughter Mia's illness and the desperation that drove an honest and decent man to do what he did, and about the baby switch. Ava listened avidly, catching every word. Indeed, her world was changing before her eyes. It was frightening, painful, hurtful, but also joyful. Matthew, he's alive, healthy, beautiful. He's even there now, but his name is Arthur now. But that's all right. It's a good name too, like a king. Can you sue me now? Mrs. Smith lowered her head. I deserve it. What's more, I'm ready for it. Especially as my confession will be very necessary for Arthur to be recognized as your son, for the court to sort it all out. I'll tell them everything, tell them how it happened, and I'll get the punishment I deserve. My sister will take Mia for now. I've been thinking about it for a long time. What about parentage? It's a simple matter of DNA evidence these days. Mrs. Smith was actively plotting Arthur's return to his family. Ava's eyes were spinning. She was in a state of near shock, and yet she felt joy. Andrew and Arthur sat on the pier with their bare feet in the water, fishing. Anne and Ava played badminton behind them. The family was on holiday at a tourist resort. Andrew hadn't been given a summer holiday, so they hadn't gone anywhere, but just rented a cottage outside the city for the weekend. Great too. Now they were a tight-knit, loving, real family. Arthur came into their lives as if he had never disappeared, as if he had always been with them. The twins finished first grade with straight A's. Just as Ava had dreamed, on the very first day she met Arthur, the children went to the same class. By autumn, all the litigation was behind them, and Arthur was officially Ava and Andrew's son. Mrs. Smith was not imprisoned. Ava herself had petitioned for leniency for the doctor, and that petition had worked. Ava understood Mrs. Smith and forgave her, oddly enough. Yes, the woman had caused her and Andrew unbearable pain. Arthur had been traumatized too. It was no joke growing up around an unaccepting and unloving woman. And then there's the whole orphanage thing. By the way, Olivia, and really already arranged for a false diagnosis of the child, because she could not and did not want to bring up someone else's offspring. She was about to start a new life altogether. She didn't need the baby. It turned out that she could not just hand over her son to an orphanage. But if there's a disease, then it's a different matter. So Olivia followed the well-trodden path. She bribed doctors, gave whoever needed money. Smart for his age, the boy guessed everything, heard something, thought of something himself. So he ran away. As he understood that it is worth to get beyond the gates of the boarding house for sick children, and he will have no way out. Luckily, Arthur met Anne in the park by chance. The children became friends. Then Anne called her mom for help. I got it. The silence of the Sunday morning was broken by Arthur's joyous cry. You're a champion, praised his son Andrew. We'll put him in the aquarium at home, this crucian carp. As you wish. Ava waved her hands. We will, exclaimed the twins. Andrew and Ava looked at each other with a smile. They still hadn't got used to the fact that their children often said or did something at the same time. The twins, the royal twins, son and daughter, Arthur and Anne. Kindness and faith in God are not the same thing, Laura retorted. Is blessed with cognac in her drink. What about the statement that God is love? Julia smiled. My dear, there is not enough strength to love everyone. That's why you should love yourself and what you like or who you like. It is wrong, Laura objected. It does not interfere with my life. But if I get a cat, which I will not love only out of a sense of necessity to conform to God's design, then every day I will be tormented by it with conscience or head. That's one good thing, not bad, Julia said. What is the 100th or the 1,000th time we've had this discussion? Laura waved her hand and changed the subject. We've been sitting here too long, and Turkish perfume won't buy itself. Yes, I think so, Julia nodded. There's a fragrance that's been on my mind for a long time, and Winston could use a little something to add to his meager corner. It was windy along the river, but still pleasant. There were occasional boats and launches cruising along the water's surface. It smelled like fresh fish or sea salt and stone. What a wonderful Tuesday, Laura said at the doorstep of the perfume boutique. And weekdays can be nice, can't they? Julia laughed back. The women entered the shop and began to sniff the various perfumes and toiletries. An obliging chap kept checking their preferences and running from one shop window to another. Soon the friends made up their minds. The salesman packed the bottles in branded bags and handed them to the female customers. Waiting for payment by card, the terminal briefly announced that the purchase had been successfully completed. At the same time, Julia's phone rang in her purse. She lightly held the device to her ear, said a couple of times. Yes, then went as pale as a sheet. The bag of vials fell out of her hands and shattered, hitting the stone floor of the boutique. Julia flew into the hospital as if she'd fled for her life. Her heart was pounding loudly, her pupils were fluttering, her trembling hands were clutching her car keys, her blood was pounding in her temples. The woman rushed down the corridor to the wards, ignoring the doctors and nurses along the way. Already at the intensive care unit, she was caught almost hysterically in an embrace by Winston. "My girl," sobbed Julia, like a wounded wolf, hanging in her husband's arms in impotent rage. "Let me go to my girl." Winston clutched his wife to him, trying to suppress her panic attack, at least a little to take away the trembling from the shock. Laura appeared in the corridor, unable to keep up with her friend. She put her hand on Julia's shoulder in embarrassment and concern, and she looked at her with tearful eyes, full of despair and rage. "God's providence, you say? Is that your way of saying he loves me? It is your fault. You have foretold it," Julia shouted. Laura recoiled, and Winston pressed her even tighter against him. "Would you like a sedative?" asked a nurse who appeared nearby. "Yes, please," Winston nodded. "And me, too, if you can, just a little less." The girl in the white coat nodded briefly and disappeared into the office. When Julia stopped sobbing and collapsed on the sofa in the corridor, Laura asked Winston cautiously, "Winston, can you tell me what happened?" It was as if she had died after the call, and all the way she kept repeating, "Mary, my girl," and she drove so hard. She almost hit me a couple of times. Winston sighed heavily. The sedative had a slower and weaker effect on him. Today, Mary had been hit by an unknown man in a car on her way to the university. The ambulance brought her here an hour ago. They sent her straight to intensive care. No word yet. Is she alive? What are her injuries, prognosis? "And the hit-and-run driver?" Laura asked. "What about him?" "He fled the scene. The police are going through the cameras from the scene. There's mud all over the license plates and tinting all over the place. It doesn't make any sense. They're going to make a criminal case." "They probably won't, but they'll get nailed," Laura suggested. Winston clenched his fist on his knee. How could it be? A young girl run over in broad daylight in the city center. He continued to wail in a low voice. Julia cried quietly in his arms. People were changing. The lights came on in the corridor, heralding the coming of evening. Laura sipped her coffee a few times, then apologized and left, asking Winston to be on the phone. Finally, the doors to the intensive care unit opened, and a surgeon stepped out. "Doctor." Winston and Julia, who had more or less calmed down, immediately instinctively stood up. The surgeon nodded at the office door a little further away. Everyone stepped inside. "Let's go without much ado and softening. I understand all your worry, so I won't drag this out," he said, sitting down at the table and folding his hands in front of him. "We're ready," Dr. Winston nodded, squeezing Julia's palm tightly. "Right now, your daughter is recovering from surgery. Her condition is stable and serious. We have made every effort to save the girl's life after her injuries, but at least one more complex spinal operation will be required. We are willing to do anything to make sure her daughter gets better," Winston said. "There is a catch." The doctor looked even more seriously into the parents' eyes. "Very few specialists in our country will be able to perform such an operation. If they refuse, you will have to go to our colleagues in another city." "And what happened next?" Cassandra asked almost in a whisper, nervously crumpling the edge of the tablecloth in her palms. The buckwheat porridge in the plates had long since gone cold. Outside the window, she could hear the cicadas chirping back and forth and the rustling of lilac leaves. "Of course, my parents had agreed to the operation." Julia had spoken bitterly then about Mary's longing to go there. So she's going. In order to save my sister and cover the cost of the flight and surgery, Julia and Winston had to sell our beloved house in New Jersey. Alex looked away. His eyelids trembled faintly, betraying the tension and bitterness of losing the family nest. The cicadas outside the window sounded alarmingly, sharply, and one of them snapped from the birch tree in the yard across the street. Cassandra felt ashamed. Shame swept through her body like the splash of an April puddle. "Did you find out who did it?" she asked again, almost in a whisper, fighting the shame. "They are still searching," Alex answered tiredly. "The main thing was that Mary was alive, even if she was in a wheelchair now. The rest paled against the background of what her parents went through during her treatment. Her sister still remains in the US under the care of doctors for the time being. That's why she wasn't at the wedding." Cassandra's conscience did not allow her to ask further questions, and her husband was not particularly inclined to do so. They ate porridge in silence, and separated. Alex went to work on his laptop, and Cassandra went outside. After what she had heard, she wanted to get some fresh air. A flower cleared of weeds bowed its bell heads in greeting. Cassandra thought about it, twirling the simple engagement ring on her finger. She loved Alex, but his wealthy family and successful reputation were a welcome addition to love. With horror, Cassandra realized that a thought ran in the furthest corner of her mind. Why should I go to all this trouble and worry about other people's problems? Aren't there enough guys in LA? The girl shook her head as if chasing the thought away. She didn't get home until it was dark, strolling along the street and looking at the suburbs. Alex was still working. The monitor cast a bluish light on his face. Cassandra brought her husband a cup of herbal tea. "Would that be enough for today?" she asked timidly, stroking his shoulder. Alex stretched, craning his neck. "Do you want to know what happened next?" He suddenly looked at his spouse. Instead of answering, Cassandra sat down next to him on an old-fashioned creaky chair and froze in anticipation. The whole summer was a blur for the Winston family, Alex began. It was not until autumn that Mary's condition stabilized. Julia, who stayed with her in the hospital, finally allowed herself to go home. Although there was no home in the usual sense of the word. The family moved into one of their 3-room flat on the outskirts of San Francisco. True, they had to evict the tenants, who were not too happy about this turn of events. But there was nowhere to go. "Nothing, we will squeeze," consoled his wife Winston. "The main thing is that Mary was saved." "You already said that," said Julia, standing in the middle of the boxy kitchen with a glass of whiskey in her hand. She was drinking more and more often to numb her worries and stress. Winston worried that his wife would one day drive drunk. "I can't tell you about the house yet," he sighed. "What the hell happened to us? Laura keeps dragging me to church to pray. She jinxed my daughter." Julia grinned bitterly. "I swear I didn't mean to. Maybe she jinxed her daughter by accident." Winston didn't agree. His memory obligingly jogged his memory of the unpleasant face of the petitioner who had threatened him months ago. What kind of nonsense is that? Winston took a deep breath. If you believe the threats of every disgruntled person over the years, you could have been sleeping in your coffin a long time ago. You don't believe any of this, do you? What jinx? Just a drunken cretin in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't believe it. But my gut says otherwise. Julia shook her head. Julia sipped from her glass again. "And why can't the police find him yet?" She sighed. "They're afraid to dig deeper, to keep the case quiet. I know they feed me excuses, like the car's gone to ground." Winston shrugged. The couple were gloomily silent. They both had a lot to do. They had to sort out their belongings after the move and get back on track. Julia slept badly in the new place. Anxious. Even a strong drink and fatigue couldn't put her to sleep. Every rustle woke and frightened the woman. She thought she heard a wheelchair creaking or the beeping of monitors in the dark corridor. She shuddered in her sleep and only dozed off at the 4th hour. But Julia didn't get much sleep that night. The phone rang insistently. The woman stretched sleepily and pressed the receiver to her ear. It was the security firm to which the lab's security system was connected. The person on duty dryly informed her of a fire in the building. Julia immediately woke Winston, and the two of them, barely pulling on clothes, ran out to the car. The car sped through the morning Los Angeles like an arrow. It was so strange and out of place in the calm that enveloped the city at such an early hour. When they pulled up to the lab, 2 fire trucks were already working there. Smoke was billowing from the windows. The flames had partially blown out the glass. A sign with the lab's name bent by the fire was lying on the pavement. You could hear glass, test tubes, flasks, sterile cabinets bursting from the heat inside. The fireman waved his arms, blocking the path of a shocked Julia. "You can't go in there. Step back a safe distance, please." Julia watched her brainchild burn as she stood beside her car in the morning car park in her nightgown and hastily thrown on overcoat. Her labor, her experience, her reputation was burning. Her soul was burning with impotent rage and the injustice of what had happened. Winston, shocked at first, quickly pulled himself together and pulled his wife to him, ready to cry. "We'll get everything back, we'll find out, we'll punish those responsible. I promise you," he reassured Julia. But her eyes said otherwise. He stroked Julia's hair, and she nuzzled her nose and wet cheeks into his jacket. "I promise," Winston said. At the wedding, the notary took the microphone in his hands and voiced the will to the mother-in-law, and barely the bride understood. The forest running outside the train window was unusually picturesque in early summer. Spruces stood fluffy, shaggy and mottled with young tufts of needles on green spread legs. Slender birches, like ballerinas, gracefully froze in a pirouette. Their white trunks stood out clearly against the background of undergrowth and rare swampy glades. The low growth happily caught the sun's rays with dense light green leaves. Sometimes black and white magpies flew out of a pile of branches and disappeared somewhere in the depths of fir trees. The picture was so peaceful that it involuntarily asked for one of the canvases of famous world artists. "How beautiful it is in Wyoming. I can't take my eyes off it," said an old country woman sitting opposite me, enthusiastically. "Hawaii is better," Cassandra said languidly. She didn't share her grandmother's enthusiasm, and she was in a gloomy mood, the cause of which was disappointment and unreasonable expectations. Until recently, Cassandra had thought that she and her husband would spend a month on the islands after their fancy wedding, drinking coconut milk under palm trees, walking among the stunning ancient temples and learning about the local gastronomy. And then they will return and settle quietly into one of her husband's flats in Boston. And life would go on as usual. But fate had it differently. Instead of a lavish wedding and an off-site wedding, a modest cafe, a marriage ceremony and a small circle of friends and family. Instead of a honeymoon in Hawaii, exile to a house in the middle of nowhere, in some godforsaken ranch on Lake Huron. Whether it was the view from the window or her own thoughts, Cassandra knew the last year had been hard on her husband's family, but not this hard. She had thought she was marrying the son of wealthy parents, a promising high-tech specialist. She thought that problems with money and real estate were a thing of the past. But it turned out that almost all the weighty property of the Berkeley family went under the hammer. From a private house, 2 cars and 2 flats in the city center, there's a small studio flat on the outskirts. Yes, it's an old ranch that no one has needed at all for 100 years. "Nowhere can be better than on one's native land," the dacha dweller replied peacefully. "Young people don't understand this and run abroad, then settle down in a foreign land. But my soul longs for home. Everything here is special, imbued with our spirit. Look at the forest, the pine trees, like heroes, stand, majestic and unshakable in the world poet's mind. Each of them is his own, native. We should respect and remember them. This way you will feel calm at heart, and your mind will be in order." The old woman raised her finger edifyingly. Cassandra sighed. The only thing she needed was instruction from her fanatical grandmother, as if she didn't have enough problems to deal with. She glanced to her left, looking for her husband's support, but Alex was reading a magazine from the comfort of his own rucksack. The train dragged the carriages along the iron tracks, tapping the wheels. Soon the friendly conductor informed the young people of their stop. Alex scrambled up, rolled the magazine into a tube, and slipped it into his rucksack. The station greeted the couple with a small platform, old tarmac, a closed ticket booth, and a dense smell of wet dust. It had rained here in the morning, and now the area was fragrant with freshness and lush greenery. It was worth it just to step aside from the path. Is there even internet here? Let's call a taxi, so we don't have to walk through the mud, Cassandra said, jumping over the puddles in her white trainers. Of course there's internet here, I'm planning to work. It was installed a few years ago, after all. You just need to call the provider and connect it, Alex said, grabbing his bags. There are local taxis. But it's only a short walk. Let's march. Don't be fussy. The weather is nice. The girl sighed and hurried after her husband. Carved plait bands, weather vanes, and cockerels, red curtains looked at the guests of the village from the courtyards. A fat ginger cat was dozing on the fence with his paw hanging down. Not even the cackling of the geese, beside which the little girl was looking at the newcomers with interest, woke him up. Cassandra flinched when one of the geese moved aggressively toward her and stretched its long neck. "Are you laughing, or don't they bite?" Cassandra grumbled grudgingly in response. She didn't like it at the ranch. Growing up in the big city, she had never been drawn to the country life. She and Alex had met while he was studying in Chicago. The guy was finishing his master's degree and had already been working remotely for several years in a large company, testing and developing applications. Cassandra was born into a middle-class family and studied to be a translator. Thanks to her mother, who lived half her life abroad, the girl immediately realized that her chosen one was from a wealthy class. When Alex was the first of the whole company, had new models of phones, gadgets, branded things, he could fly on holiday to the mountains or to the sea. He never skimped on gifts and flowers, rented a cozy flat on his own, and in general never complained about anything. The young people got along quickly. They dated for 2 years. Alex introduced Cassandra to his parents, who stayed in the city passing through from Boston. After that, the girl was finally convinced that she was very lucky. Alex's father, Winston, was a member of the Committee for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage of the city and knew all the local creative elite. And Mum Julia owned her own private medical laboratory. In passing from conversations and stories, Cassandra gradually realized that her lover's family had several properties and a couple of expensive foreign cars. "That's it. Cassie's got an oligarch," her friends sighed enviously. "And he's also a Nate guy." The girl added boastfully, "They are in great demand now and earn very well. So I'm not going anywhere. I'll work, create home coziness, and translate books in a soft armchair with tea." "Is he going to propose to you?" worried at every conversation friends. "It's not going to happen," Cassandra said confidently. "Or did I bet on this wedding for nothing? We decided to get married a year after Alex finished his master's degree and went freelance." Cassandra had spent a year planning everything that had anything to do with the upcoming wedding: the menu, the number of guests, the size of the bride's bouquet, the color of her manicure, the honeymoon, and the rest of her life. Alex, on the other hand, had become aloof. He immersed himself in his work, occasionally traveled to Boston to visit his parents, and for some reason he came back every time more gloomy than a cloud. Cassandra tried to ask him a couple of times what was wrong, but Alex either didn't say anything or gave a short answer. "My parents are in some trouble." Cassandra realized the extent of the trouble when Alex took an unannounced night flight to Boston to attend his mother's funeral. After that, the boy took months to recover. Cassandra supported him as best she could, although, except for this tragic event, she knew nothing about what was going on in the Winston family. It was not until May that she dared to speak of the wedding preparations again. Then the girl began to eat the worm of anxiety for her own plans. As a result, when she arrived in Boston after graduation, there was no luxurious wedding. Alex answered all the questions that Alex needed: a modest banquet in a medieval restaurant, a simple dress, a few friends, girlfriends, and Alex's father. Cassandra's parents were only at the festive part, and then hurriedly left for the airport, citing business. Though it seemed to the girl that they just ran away because of unreasonable expectations. And she herself wanted to run away from her own wedding, so bland and simple everything was executed. The finale was that the Winston family notary was present. Since it had been 6 months since Julia's death and it was necessary to announce the will that had come into effect, it was Alex's own decision. As a result, instead of a flat in the center of Boston, the young man got an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, which had once belonged to his late grandmother as well. And that was it. Cassandra, white with anger, couldn't hold back any longer, dragged Alex out onto the restaurant's outdoor veranda and pounced on him with questions. The young man listened silently to his wife, sighed, then knocked back a glass of whiskey. Our family had a hard year, but I didn't want to postpone the wedding, no matter what. Alex began in a calm voice. Yes, it didn't turn out the way we planned. Yes, we're not going to Hawaii. I can see Cassandra's boiling. We'll go to the country and live there for a while, get my grandmother's house in order. I'll work on a new project, and once everything works out, we'll go back to the city and get a flat so we don't have to cramp Daddy's space. Rent an apartment how? There were 2 flats and a house near Los Angeles. Cassandra was lost in the amount of shocking and growing news. I told you it's been a very hard year, Alex repeated briefly. Let's go to the guests. It's hard to entertain them alone. He gently took Cassandra by the waist. The girl was barely holding back tears of impotent rage and anger, throwing a bouquet of cheap plaster phyla in her hands. This was not how she had imagined things, not at all. After 20 minutes of walking, they finally stopped in front of a small red brick house. A wooden fence met and greeted the new occupants with old rags of paint and a drooping gate. Lilacs and jasmine grew lushly behind it, almost hiding the path to the porch. In the yard were weedy flower beds where bells, wild carnations, and iris bloomed alongside nettles. Fruit trees were visible in the distance, and the porch was hidden in the shade of a sprawling willow tree that hung over half the house like a curtain. And you mean to tell me that we're going to live in these thickets? Cassandra stared at her husband, frightened, disgusted. Why the thicket? Alex smiled. A couple of hours to work with secateurs, then sweep and paint fences, tighten hinges. It's a very cozy cottage. Cassandra grimaced in disgust. Alex took a bunch of keys out of his pocket and slipped the key into the lock on the gate. It creaked open. Everything in the house indicated that there had been no permanent owner for a long time. Alex knew that Mum had come here from time to time in recent years. Maybe a couple or 3 times during the summer and once or twice in the winter. There were dead flies on the windowsill in the kitchen. The kitchen, as well as the wicket door, echoed with creaking doors. In the room, dusty blankets covered the bureau and dresser. Alex plugged in the fridge. It hummed happily, welcoming its new owner. A couple of days of cleaning, a couple of tweaks there, a touch-up there, a tune-up there, and that's it. It will be beautiful. The man looked round the village house with satisfaction. You make yourself comfortable, and I'll get the rest of the stuff in. And I'll call about the internet. There are ISP poles in the street, so we can get it too. Cassandra shook a speck of dust off the stool and sat down. Her mood was worse than ever. She had already imagined what awaited a city-educated lady in the middle of nowhere. No girlfriends, no shops, no cafes, no clubs, no exhibitions and other cultural entertainment. Just gardening, cleaning, cooking. Cassandra remembered with horror the haggard dacha girls from the train. She felt sick to her stomach. She looked at her fresh manicure, then at her white trainers and tried to imagine herself as a peasant woman. That stupid fence, or taking up the vegetable garden with a hoe? She asked her husband unhappily when he had brought the rest of the load into the house. Is there any heating here, or do you have to make a fire in the middle of the room? Why a fire? There is an electric boiler here, Alex answered patiently, carefully putting the bag with a powerful laptop on the table. It's in front of the bathroom in the corridor. You can switch it on at night. I remember it can get chilly in here. For the first few days, Cassandra was literally sick of being in the house and the yard. She was depressed and angry at the desolation and disorder of her new home. She was also filled with boredom. There was no desire to do anything to improve the level of comfort. But Alex started to work with great enthusiasm. The provider's team promised to arrive within 5 days of the request. It's a long journey, he said. While Alex had plenty of free time, he rummaged through the small shed where his grandmother kept her gardening tools and within 24 hours had found a large toolbox and fixed all the loose hinges. Then he visited his neighbor Amanda, a permanent resident of the neighboring ranch, and borrowed a can of green paint, a pair of worn brushes, made a narrow painter's hat out of old yellowed newspapers, and began to paint the fence. So much for dabbling in this backwater, Alex. exclaimed Cassandra, sticking her head out of the window. "Alex, tell me honestly, why did we come here?" "To get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, dear Cassandra," Alex answered. "You could help your husband." Alex raised an eyebrow shrewdly, looking at Cassandra from under the newspaper cap. "We came here to tidy up the house, do a little work, and spend some time in nature. Why don't you make some dinner or go to the shop instead of grumbling? It's not far." Cassandra grumbled reluctantly on the windowsill. Her stomach rumbled. It was the evening of her second day here. They hadn't eaten anything but the tinned food and instant noodles they'd brought. No matter how hard I tried, Cassandra sighed. Her husband was right. She went back into the house, where they'd cleaned up a bit, and began rummaging through the kitchen cupboards. There was a lot of good crockery, pots and pans. "I'll see if I can get some food," Cassandra told her husband as she carefully rounded the paint-glossed wicket. "Where are you dressed up like that to get it all dirty?" Alex laughed, looking at his wife's white trainers. "It rained last night." Cassandra only glared back and walked down the street with her headphones in her ears. The shop was indeed a 10-minute walk away. But the local saleswoman, hearing the words parmesan, bacon, spaghetti, only shrugged her shoulders and laid out a packet of pasta, sausages, melted cheese on the counter in front of the customer. The village shop didn't have the delicacies of the city supermarkets. Cassandra sighed, took some more vegetables and bread, tea, sugar, salt, a few apples and eggs. It turned out that all the purchases didn't fit in the rucksack. The shop assistant looked round at Cassandra and nodded at the mesh bag that was also sold in that corner of the village shop, where you could find everything from washing powder to a doll in a pink dress. Alex smiled as he watched his wife, grumbling, drag the grocery bag through the puddles home. Cassandra's white trainers had turned into a muddy mess. "You made it from the house to the shop and back," Alex greeted her, chuckling. "I think there were galoshes in the shed." "Come on," Cassandra swung at him with the loaf that didn't fit in the bag. "Next time you'll wear galoshes." She put the groceries on the porch and, to Alex's laughter, began wiping her muddy shoes on the grass. By supper time, the man had finished painting, and Cassandra had tackled the rustic cooker, boiled pasta and sausages, made sandwiches, and even found an old jar of pickled tomatoes in the shed. Alex opened the window, admiring the golden sun, which was already beginning to cast its pink evening glare into the clouds. In the middle of dinner, when forks clattered on plates, Alex couldn't resist and poked his wife good-naturedly with his finger in her shoulder. "What are you shoving?" Cassandra was indignant. "You have to admit that it's not bad here," Alex said, looking out the window. "Bad," replied the girl with a full mouth. "It's dirty. The mosquitoes are biting. Civilization is on the verge of fantasy." Instead of answering, Alex gently took her by the chin and turned her to the window too. "And what do you see if you put aside the whimsy?" Cassandra swallowed the sausage, feeling like an idiot with full cheeks. She swallowed and still began to look at the sky and the bushes. "I can see and smell paint," she said after a moment under her husband's gaze. Alex sighed tiredly and started eating again. "What did I say wrong? Why are you so disappointed?" Cassandra asked. "Nothing. It's fine," the man replied, putting the tomato on his fork. "Eat it before it gets cold." The internet was connected 2 days later, and Alex immediately started a new project, trying to make up for the forced pause. Although during this pause he managed to do a lot for the house and the site. "How do you feel in the middle of nowhere, dear?" her friend asked Cassandra sympathetically over the video call. Terrible, she began to complain and suddenly realized she was lying. A surprising feeling of inconsistency between words and feelings, demandingness protested inside. Contrary to herself and her habits, Cassandra was gradually getting used to the village silence and solitude. It was all reaching in and dispelling such familiar hustle and bustle and sticky city comforts. No, she still didn't like the dirt, the old furniture, the overgrown yard, didn't like taking Spartan showers as long as there was enough hot water in the boiler. Cassandra didn't like having to cook every day. But she liked something else. What it was, she hadn't quite figured out yet. On a new morning, after Alex had pecked her on the cheek for her scrambled eggs and sat down to work on her laptop, Cassandra stepped out onto the porch. Her gaze fell on the thicket the flower bed become. The hostess contemplated the triumph of Flora for a couple of minutes, then made up her mind. Cassandra looked round the shelves and found a rake, gloves, and a small rag in the shed. With her battle gear on, she hesitantly walked towards the flower bed. "Ouch, you bastard!" The girl shrieked, grabbing the stems of nettles. Old nettles. The gloves could not resist the formidable plant. Cassandra burned herself. The leaves burned her wrists. "Who grows weeds like this?" she muttered. "Now it stings. Everything in my hands." "I'll give you my gloves now. They're elbow-length rubber." "That'll do," she heard a voice from somewhere on the side through the fence, enclosing the neighboring plot. A vivacious old woman in brightly colored tracksuits, flip-flops, and an oversized t-shirt looked at her curiously. On top of that, she was wearing sunglasses with some wildly colorful frames. Granny gave Cassandra a cheeky thumbs up and disappeared around the corner of her own house. "There are enough freaks around here," she muttered, forgetting about the red sore spot on her wrist. In the meantime, the grandmother returned and handed Cassandra the gloves. It was indeed much more comfortable to pull the aggressive plants out of the ground. "That's right," the new acquaintance supervised from the side. "And then use a hoe to cut the roots so they don't grow back." Cassandra mumbled. "Thanks." The granny annoyed her, but the tenacity with which she'd taken to helping the stranger was admirable. "I see you've already met Amanda." Alex looked out of the window and waved at her neighbor. "Hello, Alex," the granny responded vividly. "Why do you keep order, but don't trim the trees? These trees have grown wide." "We haven't got to them yet," the man smiled. "There's a lot to do with the house." "I understand," the neighbor nodded. "How long are you here for?" "A month. We don't know exactly yet." "We'll see," Alex answered uncertainly. The flower bed was gradually becoming neat. Cassandra felt some moral satisfaction from it, though she was tired and dirty in the soil. Her neighbor was already handing her a pruning shears over the fence. "Here," she said. Cassandra's eyes bulged at him. "You don't know how? I'll teach you how to do it." Before Cassandra could open her mouth, a couple of minutes later, under Amanda's careful guidance, she was confidently working the pruning shears around the bushes and trees. Alex looked out the window at the work in progress and chuckled softly. Amanda was nimbly directing Cassandra's actions. So much so that the work was getting done that there was no time to take a break. By lunchtime, the two of them had cleaned and trimmed the front garden. At the same time, they washed the trees and even the windows outside. "That energetic grandmother drove me crazy." Cassandra sat down on the porch, wiping away the sweat. "You did a good job, though." Alex grinned. "What?" No, she was just so quick to command Cassandra didn't notice that she was laughing in the flow of indignation. A few seconds later, the two of them were laughing. By now, the neighbor had gone to her room. "I think you're beginning to understand the charms of life on the ranch," Alex said, putting buckwheat porridge on his plate. "I wouldn't call it charms," Cassandra said, scrubbing the dirt from under her fingernails in the sink. "But I have to admit, even if it's not my style, I've enjoyed today." Alex was radiant. "Only our neighbor is a strange aunt," Cassandra continued, not noticing Alex's smile behind her back. "If she makes me work like that again, I'll have a fight with her, by God." "There you go. Ugh, you're already using country slang." Alex approached his wife from behind and hugged her tightly. Cassandra was a little taken aback. She wasn't prepared for surprises in such a domestic situation. But she warmly stroked her husband's palm at her waist, turned to him and hugged him back. "I knew you weren't hopeless," he said quietly in her ear, "and that you would eventually realize why we were here." Cassandra pulled away suddenly and looked Alex seriously in the eyes. "Why we're here, I've more or less already realized. But the events that led up to it are still a mystery. Why don't you tell me what happened to your family?" The man let go of her waist and cautiously sat down on the stool behind her. Alex was making up his mind about something, rubbing his fingers against each other, crumpling his cheeks. Cassandra knew that state. It was like this when he was gathering his strength for something important, like when he'd proposed to her. "I was taught to keep a low profile and told that no one cares about other people's grief, Alex began. That's why I went through everything that happened alone. Except for my mom's death. I couldn't hide that. Alone. That means family. You weren't family at the time. And no offense, please, 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 please. If I dumped everything that was going on you, I don't know what would have happened. Would you get emotional, or would you just leave me? You know, that's what we men are like. We complain and nobody wants us. Cassandra was struck silent. I was probably just saving myself from the problems that a young and happy girl preparing for marriage doesn't need, Alex continued. And I knew I was strong, that I could handle it. His voice shook a little, but he continued. I got through it. I didn't break. I kept my promise. We got married on time. Well, not quite as you wanted, I know. Why did we come here after everything that's happened to my family? I want to put this pain behind me. And the best place to do that is somewhere new, away from danger and fear. Yes, but I don't understand how it happened. Cassandra stroked his shoulder encouragingly. The buckwheat in the plates was steaming. Alex took his fork and twirled it between his fingers, searching for words again. It all started last year around March, he said. Winston was in high spirits. He and his wife were going to see a play at the theater tonight. And how difficult it is for two busy adults to find time for such an event, I don't need to explain. The breeze from the vent of the old-fashioned high window seemed to tease him. Winston slid his eyes quickly over the day planner and nodded to himself contentedly. The business was finished, another 20 minutes, and he could leave the committee building in peace. We'll have to stop by the flower shop near the theater. Julia is so fond of Terry tulips. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. He was already mentally watching the opening night of the production when a knock on the door and the voice of Annie's assistant brought him back into his world. Winston, there's someone here to see you, and they say it's very urgent. Couldn't have brought them in sooner, the man muttered and said in a louder voice, let them come in. I'm still taking appointments. The door closed, but a moment later it opened again, and Winston's eyes were filled with a visitor. Everything about him seemed decent and noble, but small details told that in the past the fellow had had a decidedly dashing experience. Torn and crooked earlobes, traces of old tattoos on his fingers, his gait, all this gave away in the guest a man who had obviously gone through difficult times, and neither business suit nor inexpensive briefcase in his hands could hide it. What can I do for you? Winston paused and rose from his chair as a greeting. Yes, you can. You very much can, Winston. The guest held out his palm without further greeting. My name is Hubert, and let's get straight to business. Well, Winston hesitated a little, wondering why he did not give his surname. Please. The guest sat down in a chair, completely ignoring business ethics. Then he took out a pile of papers from his briefcase and slipped it to Winston. I am engaged in commercial real estate, and I have looked at a wonderful place for the construction of a new shopping center. I've already calculated the budget and found potential tenants for the future premises. The guest looked around the office with an evaluating look. And everything is going so well that it's just a sight to behold. But here's the problem: the place is already occupied by a useless old building, which only smokes the air and is no longer used in any way. I want a demolition permit for that building. And I assure you, I will not be indebted to such a practical man. Winston felt his guest's feigned politeness making him nauseous. Glancing at the papers, the head of the committee marveled. The guest called the museum building, built in the 70s of the 19th century in the European Baroque style, a useless building. The building was indeed in a bad shape, but it was not a barn, which can be leveled to the ground without hesitation. It is a monument of architecture, a valuable example of the skill of Russian builders, Winston said loudly. In rotting. Your monument only spreads mold year after year, Hubert grumbled. There are ponds of them all over the region, like mushrooms after the rain. Everywhere you go, you're bound to come across some valuable dog box or architectural masterpiece in the form of a beer stall. One more, one less, nobody will notice. We are going to start its reconstruction in June. The money has already been allocated for the purchase of materials. I'm afraid you'll have to find another place for your construction. Winston folded the papers in an even stack and handed them back to his guest. He frowned for a moment, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. I'm sorry, I forgot that these things don't just happen. He pulled out a dark envelope and slid it across the table to Winston. The head of the committee stared at the envelope blankly. Of course he realized and knew what was in it, and he was lying to the official who said he had never taken the money. Winston had taken it too, but only at the beginning of his business, when he had not yet realized the consequences of such actions. He was disgusted to accept money from this particular man, as if he were about to get his hands into stinking swamp mud. Take this away at once and vacate my office. Winston looked sternly at the guest. I said no authorization would be granted. Hubert tucked the envelope back into his pocket, his face contorted with anger, resembling an old sock. Well, I tried to do things the easy way. He stood up and pulled back the hem of his jacket. But I guess the old ways are still the most reliable. Winston, I'm not going to let this go. You'll be sorry you couldn't negotiate with me. The guest suddenly changed his unpleasant expression to a stone-cold mask before he closed the door with a loud slam. Don't be ill, the committee head muttered as he glanced at the impudent man. The historic monument may have been saved, but the mood was ruined. And in addition, Winston had a strange feeling that the obnoxious man was vaguely familiar to him. It was hard to call spring New York friendly, but on this day of the first week in April it was nothing short of a miracle. The wind from the bay had stopped blowing cold gusts through the streets, and the frowning clouds had lazily spread away, allowing the sunlight to touch the cobblestones, pavements, and roofs of the old buildings. Julia even opened the window in her car and enjoyed inhaling the spring freshness, slightly damp from the canal water. The weather is just perfect. Looking out the window with admiration, her best friend Laura exclaimed. Let's go to that lovely coffee shop on line 20, Julia suggested. We'll have a cup of cappuccino with syrup, and then we'll walk along the river and look in that shop with Turkish perfume. What a tempting suggestion, Julia said, watching the traffic lights at the crossroads. I think it's a good day for it. Let's just go to the lab to get the paperwork. I need to buy supplies. Laura nodded, then took out a mirror from her purse and began to color her lips, anticipating a good time. You know what they say about people like you, God kissed, she asked her friend, slamming the mirror shut. I'm an atheist. Julia grinned, letting pedestrians pass. I believe in evidence-based medicine, scientific data, and exact science. It doesn't matter whether you believe or not, Laura insisted. He loves you, and don't you try to argue. Look, your husband is a prominent man, and the marriage is one for life, and your kids are both smart and settled in life, you might say. Alex also works in a promising field and has almost got an honors degree. Mary is offered to work in America she hasn't even studied yet. Isn't that God's blessing? Julia wrinkled her nose. Her pious friend had started the same old rant. How many times they'd argued about it was beyond counting. But Laura was right about one thing. Julia was proud of her children. Her eldest son Alex was due to finish his master's degree at a prestigious university in a year's time. And the youngest daughter Mary studied in her hometown and chose the path of international management. She dreamed of traveling halfway around the world. Mary had already received an internship offer in a private travel agency in the States as a specialist in Eastern Europe. The car pulled up in front of the lab building. Julia grabbed her purse from the back seat and headed for the door. She loved her work and had invested a lot of energy, money, and time in her brainchild. An endocrinologist by specialty and a skilled manager by vocation, Julia had combined the two into one. A few years ago, she finally opened a private laboratory. It took a long time to save up, to get into loans for expensive medical equipment, to negotiate with direct manufacturers, to find specialists, to teach them how to work with complex new generation devices. But it was all worth it. The lab quickly became famous. And plus Julia established referrals for analyses from familiar doctors to herself through old connections. The result pleased her every day, but still had a lot of debts, had to pay the staff, not stingy. After all, it was difficult to find the same professionals who were trained by Julia herself. We had to buy new devices to meet the demands of medical centers and some wealthy clients. Sometimes I had to do some analyses myself. But all this warmed her soul and only motivated her more to develop and improve her unusual business. Inside the laboratory at the reception desk, she was always greeted with a smile, and not a fake one, but a sincere one. Julia had never shouted at her subordinates in her life. She was able to hold herself confidently, without any aggression, which achieved the respect and love of the team. Some regular customers also welcomed her. Julia went behind the counter and hurriedly ran her eyes over the prepared documents. Once a week, the receptionists collected all the necessary paperwork for her here. Catheters, syringes, bandages, gloves, shoe covers. Julia mumbled. "June, where did you use so much of it? Did you eat it?" "Julia, there's been a lot of people this week. We've already run to the pharmacy to buy shoe covers and gloves," said the receptionist. "Take a picture of the receipts and send it to me in a private message, and I'll compensate for the expenses," declared the owner of the laboratory with a smile, placing a folder with papers under her arm. "I'm leaving for the day. The consumables will be delivered tomorrow morning. Oh, and tell Betty that I approve of the leave for June. Just make sure she puts in her notice so we can do this the right way." Julia said a warm goodbye to the staff and walked back out into the car park. The sun was shining in her face, surprisingly warm for April. The woman breathed in the fresh air. At such moments, she realized that life had really worked out. Whether it was God's will or her own efforts was not so important. The coffee shop was incomplete. In the afternoon, the women sat at their favorite table, took drinks and desserts. The friendly barista winked at Julia and asked if she would like to add spice to her coffee in the form of brandy. Julia delicately declined, but Laura nodded eagerly. "And yet, how amazing it is in the world," Julia said, sipping from a large cup. "I am an atheist and you are a believer. But I won't say a harsh word. And you can respond with a strong word. I'll give to a beggar at the crosswalk and you're squeamish. I love animals, and you're not even interested in cats. How so?" The next day, the news portals were full of headlines about the fire. There were calls from employees out of work, from lawyers ready to sue anyone to get paid. The building owners called. Everyone who could find the phone number of the owner of the burnt laboratory called. When the fire was put out and all the dangers were eliminated, it became clear that the medical equipment could not be repaired, and the documents and databases were lost along with the server. The fire took a heavy toll on Julia's morale, becoming a second wave that hit her like a Shiva exhalation after a brief respite. The next month passed in a frenzy of paperwork, running around and dealing with the former business. Julia realized that she would have to file for bankruptcy to reduce her debts. Winston supported his wife in this difficult decision. He knew what it was costing her. The legal battle dragged painfully long, but in the end, for the debts were sold both flats and cars of the couple, and they themselves had to move back to a small 2-bedroom in the suburbs, which belonged to Winston's father. The old man accepted his son and daughter-in-law without question or reproach. Julia broke down and sank into despondency. Winston hid his wife's condition from everyone: children, colleagues, friends. He took her to doctors, but physically the woman was healthy. However, in 3 months she aged 10 years, and from a stylish city girl turned into a shadow of herself. "Can you not tell me what happened next?" Cassandra interrupted Winston quietly. "I know. I found out 20 days after New Year's Eve. I took over the funeral arrangements," the man nodded. Cassandra put her arms around him. They stood like that in the room for a while, as if gaining a new, painful, but very valuable degree of trust in each other. Cars were rolling down the street. The town was used to going to bed early. The lights were already out in many homes. "We're all trying to recover from what happened," Alex continued, sipping his tea, which had already cooled down considerably. "Dad started going fishing with his grandfather. He loves his work in the culture committee, of course, but he says that a man does not live by his work alone. I can see that he's getting better. Though I don't know if we'll all let go of our longing for Mum." Alex sighed, apparently gathering his thoughts. Cassandra listened to the plafond of the chandelier beating against a butterfly that had flown in. "I think she left me this house, my grandmother's house, so I could always escape here. Just to drop everything: the computer, the city, the hustle, the rush, the deadlines, the projects, and relax, feel the moment. Mum was like that herself. She worked hard, but she knew how to relax. I remember when she was a child, she had a quiet time in the mornings. She would close herself on the veranda with a mug of tea, her favorite book, let her hair down and watch the sunrise. I only realized that now. Why did she want to do that? I wish I'd known her better, Cassandra said sadly. From what you tell me, Julia was a wise woman. Alex smiled lightly. He had an idea in his eyes. Let's follow her example tomorrow. To hell with this project. Let's go for a walk in the woods. Maybe pick some mushrooms or berries. Do you know what kind of berries we can pick? Cassandra looked at Alex doubtfully. I don't know, I think I remember some. It doesn't matter, laughed the man. So, shall we go? Let's go. Cassandra agreed. There must be something interesting here. Nearly a fortnight passed. Village life went on at a leisurely, measured pace. Alex spent most of the day working on a new smartphone application. However, in the evening and on Sunday he had a rest. And then together with Cassandra they walked along the village streets, went to the river, leisurely wandered along the forest paths or meadows where local old ladies grazed goats. During her husband's busy life, Cassandra suffered from idleness at first, but over time she learned to find things to do. With the help of local people, Cassandra continued to tidy up the property. She found some currant bushes, gooseberry bushes, and strawberry bushes behind the house and the garden remnants of Alex's grandmother's former farm. After a couple of days of work, the plot was transformed. The weeds were gone, the stone paths had been paved, and squares of old tiles could be seen clearly across the backyard. Cassandra then made her way to the attic. Alex helped her attach a ladder to a small door. Cassandra spent the whole day there. In the attic she found German, French newspapers dating back to the 60s and 70s. God knows how they got there. She studied the yellowed pages with enthusiasm, using her knowledge of German. She could not read the French newspapers, but she enjoyed looking at the photographs and drawings printed on the old pages, soaked with the smells of vanilla, spruce and resin. In addition to the newspapers, there were several fishing rods made of young willow twigs and feathers. The box contained an old oil can and an ancient ear flap with moth holes. Cassandra had never thought she would be so interested in these old things. But she was completely engrossed in it. She only came to her senses when Alex peered through the attic window. I wondered where the wife was. She's got a whole vault of antiquities here, he said with a smile. A treasure trove indeed. Cassandra laughed, proudly showing her husband the ear flap she had found. Wow, that's my old ear flap. And the fishing rods I used to run to the pond with them when I was a kid. Alex admired, touching the old rods. Let's go tomorrow morning, check them and try to catch something. Let's go. But I'm not very good at fishing, Cassandra agreed absent-mindedly. It's no more difficult than putting on eyelashes, Alex encouraged her. The fishing experiment ended with a dozen gudgeons, which could be considered a success. Cassandra offered to release the fish back into the pond, but Alex's hunting instinct kicked in, and he flatly refused, saying that he would do the cooking himself. So they argued, going back to the house, what culinary masterpiece was better to create from the caught gudgeons. At the neighbor's house, Alex noticed an unfamiliar car. The landlady herself was busy at the fence, protecting the front garden from maple seeds. Do you have guests or relatives? Alex asked, opening the gate for Cassandra. Yes, my nephew came with a friend. It's better in the country than in the city. You can go to the bathhouse, sit in the gazebo, in the garden, and have a few drinks in the evening, the friendly neighbor winked at Alex. I'd argue about where it's best, Cassandra muttered, hugging a bucket of fish as she waited on the porch. Alex waved to his neighbor in a welcoming gesture, and he and Cassandra disappeared into the house. Why don't we sit in the garden tonight, too? He suggested, taking the gudgeons from his wife. I'll work until 9 o'clock, and then we'll take a lantern, hang it on the apple tree, and put on an old blanket. I'll tell you in confidence my neighbor has some excellent naluka. Oh no, not liquor, Cassandra waved her hands. By the way, if you're going to work, who's going to do the fish? Alex shrugged his shoulders guiltily and looked at the freezer. Cassandra sighed feignedly and wagged her finger at him. She had no desire to handle the gudgeons herself. Evening came stealthily, pink sunshine, the smell of warm resin, and the soft trills of the nightingale. Cassandra made simple sandwiches, fried toast, and brewed a simple compote of apples and strawberries. I see you've become such a hostess. Alex shared his impressions and immediately started tickling Cassandra. She laughed, almost knocking over the pot of compote out of surprise. She suddenly didn't care so much about her manicure, the fit of her jeans, or whether her eyebrows were painted. Her face glowed with smooth skin without expensive creams and toners. Water and fresh air worked better than certified beauticians. Cassandra had washed and put away her white trainers just in case, preferring to walk in either flip-flops or simple soft shoes. Garden chores were no longer intimidating, the internet was no longer necessary, and the city was less and less in her mind. I made it for the first time. She nodded at the compote when she was free of the embrace. I really don't know what came out of it. Whatever it is, I think it's delicious. Alex shoved his finger into the compote with interest, then nodded authoritatively. It's too good for the first time, he said. Cassandra laughed again. Alex's sense of humor and amazing ability to switch from one mood to another was why she had fallen in love with him. At first, when she didn't know about his family or his job. In the orchard under the apple trees, they spread an old blanket, covered it with a plaid, hung a lantern on a branch, brought out unpretentious treats, and sat down to play real bone dominoes in a box Cassandra had also found in the attic. Soon the sun was almost down. The scarlet rays fell into the forest tops. The reeds subsided, the night crickets chirped, the airwaves from the shaggy shepherds and the fir trees rustled. A chill came from the river. Night butterflies and moths danced under the lantern. Alex and Cassandra were enjoying the magic of the village evening when not quite sober voices came from the neighbor's plot. "What's there to drag here to the table?" sounded the disgruntled voice of one of them. Then came heavy footsteps, a cracking sound, and finally the sound of a light blow. "Be careful, my aunt will hit me with a frying pan," later said the second voice. "You will flood the beds, there will be a flood." "Nonsense," resented the first. "It won't cost her anything if a couple of tomatoes don't grow. Why will she go bankrupt?" There was a squeak, followed by a commotion, indicating that food and bottles were being piled up on the outdoor table in the gazebo. Here came Aunt Amanda's guests. "They must have come out of the bath," Alex said. "I hope they won't make too much noise. I don't want to hear any drunken stories on a night like this." "Let them sit there. It doesn't bother me," Cassandra shrugged and pulled a bone out of her domino box. "Your turn." Alex responded to her move. Behind the fence of tightly woven ivy and young netting, the conversation continued. Men were discussing some business of their own, laughing loudly. From time to time there was the clinking of glasses, and their voices became more and more disheveled. "That's a nice aunt you've got," Stephen said, the man with the higher voice. "She has a bathhouse, and beer, and pickled cucumbers. Grandma should organize all this business, open a recreation center. She'd be worried about it in her old age. There's almost nothing to do here. They've just recently installed the internet. People would come here in droves to have a rest. Maybe we should give her an idea?" "She wouldn't agree," said the second one, apparently with his mouth full. "Your Aunt Amanda has become too stubborn by the time she's 70. All she wants to do is build. Especially where there's nothing to tear down." "Of course she does," said the first one. "Money has to be found everywhere. When you build in the city, so everywhere will shake out the soul fire statements from all sorts of departments. Site plan. Ugh. And if you're very lucky, you'll argue with the guardians of cultural heritage and get a demolition permit." The voice deliberately said the last sentence with excessive expression in its intonation. Alex's and Cassandra's ears perked up, somehow unknowingly and mutually. "You mean that story about the Winston family, don't you?" grinned the other one. "Yes, that one, wasn't it?" confirmed the first. Alex and Cassandra froze with cups in their hands and looked at each other without speaking. "So I didn't build a shopping center on the site of this noble manor either. But I have spoilt this official's life," boasted the first one smugly. "It's dangerous to mess with you, Mr. Hubert," the base man grinned again, stretching out his first name and patronymic in the manner of the young Boyarsky. "Switch on the video," Alex whispered to Cassandra, barely audible, and nodded at the fence. The two of them crawled carefully up to it and tried to see what was happening in the arbor through the foliage. Fortunately, there was a convenient loophole. They were now 3 meters away from their neighbor's conversation. Cassandra switched off the screen of her smartphone and pressed it as tightly as she could against the hedge, which both allowed them to hear everything and concealed them from view. I've had a grudge against Winston SR. For a long time, ever since he took my girlfriend from me, the first voice continued. That fool, Laura. She rushed to him. She said he was kind and always there for her, but you, Hubert, you're like a dog, always hanging around. A pain in the arse, you see. And he loved her like hell. Women never tell the truth. When he noticed, he threw a pickle on his fork. That's all right. The opportunity presented itself. I got that bitch all to myself. Hubert said to himself, I'm a good dog. I hope you won't hold me accountable for any of my blunders. Well, Stephen said, the man who loves money and respects my rules, I'm your best friend, but also to those who have such a bath and a kind mistress. The men laughed. They drank again. Do you know who it is? Cassandra whispered quietly in Alex's ear, who was barely breathing and catching every word. I don't know, but I can guess, he said. My father had a comrade in his old photographs, and he didn't like to talk about him. I think he's sitting in front of us now. Hubert shook off the fly and put more mushrooms and pickles in the bowl. So what did you do with Winston, tell me? He asked his drinking partner. He crunched his knuckles and grinned unpleasantly, as if he had been waiting for that question. It was nothing special with him. What was the classic saying? If you want to hurt someone, find his weak spot, so I found it. Hubert took a loud bite of pickle. His woman first. I made inquiries, and then I sent one of my young men, brigade outlaws, to visit Winston's fool at the crossroads. But the sad thing is, he didn't quite pull it off. The girl was rescued. Her father sold the house so that she could have her legs done by foreign surgeons, the narrator continued, forcibly restraining his growing indignation. Cassandra barely held back her sobs, and Alex's face changed. The smartphone continued to write. Hubert was glowing with pleasure. It was obvious that it was not the first time he had told about such terrible things. On my advice, he poured a new drink into his shot glasses. Then he was silent again, waiting for them to exhale, to believe in miracles. Roz Hubert batted the air with the palm of his hand. Wiring problems in her office, and goodbye $1,000,000 test tubes. Stephen, you'd admire my abilities. What happened next? Interrogated the drinking buddy. What was next? I wanted to get to my son in New York. I didn't. The cops were digging so hard about the arson and the hit and run. There wouldn't have been enough money for all of them. I'm in favor of putting that bastard away for the rest of his life. Alex glared hatefully at Hubert through the net of leaves. That's who's to blame for Mum being gone. Cassandra held her husband tightly by the shoulder and shared his rage. But giving herself away was not to be tolerated. They say the 90s are gone. Hubert waved his hand picturesquely in the air. But when you hear stories like this, you realize that there's no way. Go away. I even run my business according to the old tried and tested schemes, so that I could pay these leeches full taxes. He laughed unpleasantly at his own prudence. Good. It's a wilderness and a fairy tale here. The man stretched himself. Next, the conversation turned to the subject of mistresses, but Alex and Cassandra were no longer interested in that. They listened for another 10 minutes just in case. Then the men disappeared in the doorway of the bathhouse. In the morning, Alex sat in the kitchen darker than a cloud, drumming his fingers on the table. All they had at their disposal was a dictaphone recording of the conversation. It was a lot, and very little at the same time. Hubert could easily tell there was another person on the tape altogether. And all of it shook Cassandra's smartphone in the air. The slippery type has covered all his orifices with either money or lawyers. Alex frowned even harder. An hour ago, he'd seen Hubert and Jack throw their bags into the car and drive away. What was left in the gazebo the day before was of little concern to them. There's already a criminal case against the sister, Alex said slowly. The fire is also being investigated, but it's too slow. It's understandable that a recording would speed things up. Cassandra nodded understandingly. I know that look. Did you come up with something? Instead of answering, Alex got up and quickly headed to his desk, where he had a few blank discs in his laptop case. Tomorrow I'll go to the city and take the present to the police, he said. clicking the mouse. And at the same time, I'll meet a fellow from the tax office. I think he'll be interested to know how Mr. Hubert's firm is doing. Cassandra looked admiringly at her husband and once again realized how adept he was at changing his mood to suit the situation. Like a chameleon. What should I do? She put her hand gently on his shoulder. I want to help too. You'll help if you make a nice dinner and wait for me here. Everything else is my concern. Alex rubbed his cheek in his wife's hand. The granny with the trolley was barely walking along the zebra. Hubert couldn't stand it and pressed the signal as hard as he could. The granny jumped up and hurriedly retreated to the edge of the crosswalk, accompanying her retreat with a bunch of swear words. They're used to pretending to be old and infirm, he muttered to himself as he accelerated out of the traffic lights. Hubert drove to his office in an upbeat mood. He was in a good mood when everything was under control. At such times, the work flowed. He felt like the ruler of the world, the one who kept everyone around him on a leash. The day before, he had been with a beautiful mistress, and before that, he had gone with his partner to a bathhouse in some backwoods ranch on the riverbank. Memory obligingly planted the scent of spicy perfume in his nostrils, and the flavor currants wine olives. We should go to these places again, Hubert suggested to himself, and then perhaps I'll take my wife to a holiday resort, and we'll put the liqueur into industrial production. It's not a good thing to lose such recipes. He drove up to the business center, where he rented almost the whole floor for his firm's office, and with some surprise saw a police car with its flashing beacon on at the entrance. His heart sank unpleasantly. As Hubert stepped out of the car, an officer with an ID slowly approached him. Hubert? Yes, he nodded calmly. During his years in business, Hubert had learned to hide his fear and insecurity behind a stone face or sycophancy, depending on the individual in front of him. We're conducting a search of your office. Do not attempt to interfere with police work. What's this about? Hubert yawned as he asked the question. There is information about tax evasion and business splitting, the policeman replied briefly. Hubert didn't raise an eyebrow. In his mind, however, he was feverishly going over in his head how he could have blundered. On the floor, the staff were already crowded in the corridor in front of the offices. Megan's secretary was sobbing, smearing mascara on her face. Hubert, what's going on? Are we all going to jail? She clutched at her heart. No one's going to jail. Stop being hysterical, he told her. He had already realized that someone had ratted him out in cold blood and in a big way. Hubert also realized that he could not get away with it. Was he preparing to deny it or to keep silent? The policeman in charge of the search received a short phone call. He then approached Hubert. Hubert, you are detained on suspicion of committing an offense under the part causing grievous bodily harm. Hubert lost his mask for the first time and shrank with fear, shrunken as if he had chewed a lemon. The policeman pulled out the handcuffs, and for the first time he couldn't think what to do. He had been in difficult situations many times, but he had always had a safety net. Now his brain was looking for it and not finding it. The former employees of the firm watched in amazement as their boss was put into a police car. Stephen betrayed someone whispered in a low voice. Hubert had spared his own skin, the bastard. You'll all be flattened to the ground. The hell with these bums. However, he was not going to get out soon because the investigators had a whole list of offenses, which began to open up like sores, as soon as they dug deeper, thanks to one videotape. The September days were still spoilt with a warm breeze and a ray of sunshine. The airport lived its usual life. After the peace and quiet of the countryside, it seemed noisy and uncomfortable to Cassandra. What time was the plane leaving? Is it due to land for the third time? Winston asked. At 3:45, Dad, for the third time, Alex answered him. It's 3:40. He gazed into the stream of exiting passengers. He wouldn't miss his sister, though. Mary was on her way back from the hospital. Do you think she and I will like each other? Cassandra touched her husband on the sleeve. Of course you will, Alex assured her. And you'll be able to talk in another language. Soon a voice from the speakers announced the arrival of the flight to New York. and then a female volunteer appeared in the distance, pushing a wheelchair with a girl in it. Mary turned out to look a lot like Alex. She was so cheerful that Cassandra secretly envied her, though then she shamed herself at the thought. Being fully capable, she realized how strong the will to live and the value of that very life could be at times like this. After all the greetings, hugs, and questioning, the company walked out to the terminal car park. Mary opened her mouth in rapture. "Is that Grandpa's limo?" Winston obligingly opened the door of the white old Lincoln. It was the only car that survived in the family. "We'll visit our grandfather today, and tomorrow we'll all go to our ranch," Alex suggested, as they drove along the highway away from the air harbor. "You sound like you've lived there all your life," Winston said. Almost Alex mumbled awkwardly. "Cassandra and I decided to stay at my grandmother's house until next summer. It's quiet, peaceful. I can work remotely, and so can she. We planted new trees on the property. We'll continue the renovations. Why not live?" "Sure, let's go." Mary exclaimed. "It's been ages since I've been to the countryside like this." "I'll take you, but I won't stay, because I have committee business," Winston said softly. Cassandra listened to the cheerful chatter, sitting on the deep soft seat of the Lincoln next to Mary, and realized that she didn't want to go back to the stone jungle, that it wasn't so important to have real estate in an elite area, that one could be happy with the ability to walk in green grass, that the trill of crickets in the evening was better than clubs and dancing until morning, and that a loved one was loved simply for what he was. The landscape around was gradually acquiring autumn colors. The leaves of birch trees were painted with bright spots. Aspens shamefully covered their gray trunks with crumbling leaves. Alex and Cassandra had spent the summer tidying up the house and grounds in between jobs. Cassandra took her laptop from Los Angeles and registered on a foreign language tutoring portal. The business quickly took off, and soon she had several regular students who often asked where Cassandra was teaching from, as the picturesque pine trees in the window, the sunset, or the river appeared in the background. Occasionally, Amanda would visit the couple. She treated the young people to Naluka, as well as homemade pickles and mushrooms. Alex did not say anything to her neighbor about what kind of man her nephew Stephen was involved with. Only once the woman had mentioned that Stephen was fussing his friend had been shut down. The man only hummed contentedly. He already knew about everything that had happened with his new firm. Old connections and friends at the IRS hadn't let anyone down except Cassandra. Alex didn't report finding and punishing the culprit responsible for all their family's troubles. Father was still having a hard time. Mary had spent almost a year abroad and wanted one thing: to be home at last, to rejoice and enjoy her native land. Contrary to her fears, her sister was able to manage the pram and did most of her daily chores on her own. They even traveled by train to the cemetery to visit Mum's grave without adventure. Mary talked a lot about her treatment in the hospital, about the American mentality, about the culture and way of life. "But you know what I realized?" she said. "While my legs were being put back together, I was putting boiled potatoes on my plate. I want to give hope to similarly ill children that they can still have joy and not give up on their desires. While I was in hospital, I started a blog and it became popular." "You're doing a great job," Cassandra praised her sincerely. "I'm not going to give up my dream of traveling," Mary said firmly. "Let it start in upstate New York." Everyone laughed. The kettle was steaming, ready to pour a fragrant herbal drink into mugs. "I've got some news, too," Alex said, glancing slyly at Cassandra. "I finally finished and launched the voice translation app on my smartphone." "Is that why you needed my help from time to time?" Cassandra guessed. "That's right," Alex nodded. "Now that I've sold it, I can fulfill what I promised you back in Los Angeles. A wedding trip to Hawaii. We can leave tomorrow." Mary stared with burning eyes, first at her brother and then at Cassandra. Cassandra couldn't believe her ears or her senses. Palm trees, elephants, the coast of a distant ocean, temples and hot summers were all in her mind. But now she didn't want to go there unrestrainedly, demandingly, terribly. She just wanted to go, the way one goes to visit a friend. "You don't have to fly tomorrow," Cassandra smiled softly. "Or the day after that either. There is no such enchanting autumn in Miami, no such enchantment of nature, no such grip on the morning and so many mushrooms and berries in the forest. I just can't miss it, you know." Cassandra said. Autumn will pass here, and in Hawaii it will be so eternal summer and sunshine. Let's go there after New Year's. Come on, great, Alex marveled. Why not on New Year's Eve? Because I want to celebrate it here, too. Cassandra circled the surrounding space with her hands. I want to gather all my relatives, to bring a tree from the forest, to set the table. Here, in our house. Without a word, Alex pulled Cassandra to him and hugged her tightly. That evening, the three of them talked for a long time and drank 3 kettles of herbal tea with lambs and jam. The kitchen windows were burning with light when almost the whole town had long since gone to sleep. What young people, Amanda said good-naturedly as she closed the window. First they stay up late, and then they're in a hurry to get on with their lives. An old cricket clicked softly, scaring away a bat under the roof. Night was quietly enveloping the city in a dry embrace to give power to the morning tomorrow. As it always had before,